and I spend all my money on whiskey and beer. Go down in some hollow and set up my still.
Well, no, because it would have been obvious. Because we'd have been colluding and kind of, he gave me a little look over here that you caught last time is how you got it. But right there was a perfect, because he asked we were recording, and I was like, no, we're not. And then you know, you alluded to the fact that we try and get you on that, and the shuffle happened, and then the mic was up to you. I could have got you. I could have lead you, but anyway.
Did you play defensive tackle?
I did.
I thought so.
Yeah. I should have never been in that position. I was, about the exact size I am now. 5'10", 5'11", about 220 pounds, 30
You have
pounds.
to be fast for that position.
You do, but being big also helps quite a bit too, because you can just clog up that middle. And everybody behind me was bigger than me by at least 2 or 3 inches, and sometimes upwards of 100 pounds. But
I was 135 pounds.
Wet.
And I played cornerback.
Wow, well,
And I could get creamed by those offensive tackles,
If they could get you.
if they could get me.
Yeah,
I would roll over and play dead a lot.
I had several.
Back up.
I had.
Let me go closer.
yeah, pull the mic. You can pull it closer to you.
I had
There we
several.
go.
Until I
tricks.
don't sing.
Yeah.
I play
Well, you
bass
start
guitar.
singing if you want to.
I play bass guitar.
Simon has a voice, actually, so y'all can kind of
There we go.
do a little duo here.
No, not I.
All right, so welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Appalachian Podcast. I'm your host, Billy Riddle. With me, as always, is my cheeky co-host.
Cheeky little chappy. I don't want to point out to the listeners now that Billy is actually drinking out of a pink cup, which is very becoming. It's a Yeti. I mean, not name dropping. It is his daughter's, and that's his only excuse for drinking out of a pink Yeti cup. Carry on, Billy.
Well, my birthday is coming up around the corner. If anybody out there wants to get me something, perhaps my own personalized little Yeti right here would be nice, so I wouldn't have to continue to steal my daughter's. But it holds the ice better than anything else I got in the house. And as you know, sometimes
Double skinned.
Exactly. So I want to make sure it stays cool and cold. That way I don't have to get up, a bunch. And
I find it interesting that people put Yeti stickers on their trucks. Is that, I don't quite get it. I mean, it's a cooler. But also, this is like advertising for a company, and they're not paying.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's
And you're actually letting people know
that you spend a lot of money.
that you spent a lot of money on something that was Yeti.
Yeah, so they might be breaking into that car more often, so they probably get other expensive stuff sitting around.
Well,
it's kind of.
Well, I'm going to put a sticker on the back of my truck that says styrofoam coolers.
The original.
The old school. We, we're Simon. Before we get going here, my wife this weekend. Let's just bless her. She went off for her first little adventure away from the children. First time she's ever been away from either one of them, and especially both of them at the same time. She went on a bachelorette party to Nashville. And just the difference in how women do it and how guys do it is like we men get kind of the reputation for being wild and stuff for whatever reason, but they go to Nashville and they are out, at a new place every couple of hours or hitting this spot and hitting that spot. And they're all wearing their matching goofy shirts and their sashes, all that nonsense, whatever. Now, my only experience for comparison, our bachelor party I went to a couple years ago, it was the first time I went away from, my daughter. We all got a house on Lake Norman and never left the house the entire time. Not once. Like we left to go to the grocery store to get either more alcohol, more liquor, did a big crawfish broil and, had good food and stuff. So yeah, like we never left. And it's just, it's crazy how there's this stereotype of us just being pegged as irresponsible and stuff. And we get in there and stay at the same place, don't go anywhere, do anything. And the women are out acting crazy. It's just wild difference, and we only had one fist fight. They probably had none. But
there's a reason that I stay this side of the pond, because if I ever go back to England for any length of time, there's some vendettas out there that stem from stag nights, rugby tours, and various shenanigans that I got involved in and led. And now the stories are coming out, and I'm actually responsible for quite a lot of them. So I'm staying here, and I'm claiming the Fifth, and I embrace the Second Amendment.
Well, because by the time we all catch up to your shenanigans here, you're going to be about 78 and a
That's it.
walker, and we'll feel too bad for you. So.
Exactly. I daren't go back to England.
Well, she did. She got me a nice little belt buckle. I thought that was kind of fitting for the show. It's it says "Come and take it." I don't know exactly. I've never actually worn a belt buckle, but I kind of guess that's where she'd gotten me. And it goes well with the mullet, which was apparently a point of contention for this bachelorette party this weekend because her wedding is coming up here in the very near future, and I think the bride-to-be is somewhat worried about me showing up in my current hairstyle. Not that I'm part of the wedding party, but my wife is like the maid of honor or some noise like that, so I will have to be in some of the pictures, and I will actually be there. So the hair, I think there's a campaign out. My wife is to the point now where she's like, "Oh, you've had your fun," which is weird because my wife in other ways will describe me as the one person who doesn't know when the fun ends and doesn't know when to kind of stop because, of course, obviously she's hung out with us up in Callaway before. She's like, "Your daddy just," why am I explaining how she explains this to my kids? Like, your daddy, he just doesn't know when the party stops, which fair enough. But if that's your assessment of me, then you also think that only 3 weeks of this hairdo and I've had enough. Come on now.
This is just the beginning.
Yes. And do I feel bad for her friend? Absolutely not. I love you, Catherine. I think she's a wonderful girl. She's not even going to listen to this, so I can say anything bad about her I want to. As much as I bug her about listening to the show, I don't think she does. But either way, it's the hairstyle. It's bigger than me at this point. You know what I mean? It's taken on something of its own.
It is, Billy.
I've had a weird week. I had somebody at work a few days ago come up to me and say, somebody new. I won't drop his name, so as to not give away where I work, but he said, "Hey, you're the part-time guy, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's the one with the podcast. I was like, "Yeah." He said, "I recognized your voice. I've listened to some of the shows before." I used to work for Chris Williams, and Chris has been on quite a bit. He's been up there to the cabin and so forth. And then the next day I'm floating down the river. Or no, we're down at the river with the kids on the Blackwater at the beach, and some people just start floating by in canoes and stuff. They're like, "Hey, I recognize your voice." And of course, he was friends with Chris Montgomery as well. And then the Saturday evening, I go over to Roanoke, another guy. He's like, "Hey, I just picked up on the show last week. I really enjoy it." And I was like, "Which one?" I said, "Well, listen to the Whitey Taylor one if you really want a good one." And he said, "That's the one that got me hooked." I said, "Well, tell that to everybody because that was one heck of a show." But I think it's just been funny to just how everything's kind of molded together in the past couple of weeks between the hair and the up and comings and all this kind of stuff. It's rather interesting.
Showbiz, mate.
It
Showbiz.
is. Real quick, big shout out to Rocky Mount Burger Company. They're a huge sponsor of this show. Brian does a lot to help us out. It's one of the best places in downtown Rocky Mount to grab a drink. That was a whole shit storm that got stirred up on that. I don't know if you saw that or not.
I didn't see it.
We might talk about it later. Either way, but yeah, Brian's super good to us. We got a couple events coming up here in the near future. I know for us some private events. We're going to be taking place there and trying to fill the place up, but also some on tap things. I think some of these guests, I'd like to start going and doing shows out in a live audience because some people would really like to hear this show. As our guest today was telling me, he sold out of books, I guess yesterday. And I'm starting to think a lot of these people would show up here to want to listen to these things in live. So might start doing some stuff like that. And Brian's been so good to us at the Burger Company. And like I said, every time you go down there, the food's always good. It's always fresh. Bo is on point right now. So anytime you're in Rocky Mount, make sure you seek them out. Start up at the top of the hill, get you a beer at Living Proof, and walk your way down. And also Rocky Mount Smokehouse. I can't say enough about Buddy. Hopefully we're going to get him on the show here in the next few weeks. I think he's going to be catering our little event down our fantasy football draft that I've been telling you need to come to. We're going to do a show down there. I want you to watch the shit show ensue. You have to witness something like this at least once in your life. So we're planning on Buddy's going to take us some food and stuff down there, and I told him to come enjoy the shit show a little bit.
You mentioned something, was it last week, about doing another, what do they do up at Living Proof?
Trivia night.
Another trivia night.
Yes, I think we're going to be hosting trivia night sometime around the late part of October. It's going to be race weekend, Martinsville race weekend. So on that Wednesday night, we'll get everybody buttered up and get their Sunday, Saturday, Friday, Thursday, pregame Wednesday, alcohol kick, I guess. We'll do some racing trivia. I'm going to come up with a few local questions. So that's, be on the lookout for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, all those, big shout out to them and all them who look after us and take care of us. And for all the subscribers out there on Patreon, you're going to be entered automatically in a drawing this week. It's going to get one of the books of the author we got here today. So get on tap. Patreon.com/get on tap is where you can subscribe. $3 a month. Simon and I are also working out a little deal. We might start doing these things. That's not Twitter anymore. It's X, I guess. But these things called spaces where Simon can just jump on his phone. I can jump on my phone. We can have some really cool conversations with people all over the country. A lot of these connects we've had. So we're thinking about doing, instead of setting up and doing the whole Zoom thing for the subscriber content, maybe take some of the Twitter spaces. What I always got to do is just put the phone to his ear. He can pop in and out. It's going to be something unique and different. So we're talking to some people. We can have Spike jump in every now and then, Chip, Brandon up in Floyd County. So it's one of those kind of deals where I think we're going to move in that direction a little bit and talk about some cool stuff. So with all that being said, I'm real excited to introduce our guest here today. It's somebody we've told y'all we're going to have on here for quite some time now. And it's author Phillip Gibbs. Phillip, you're a Franklin County resident, and you just got done writing this book that I've had a chance to read all but like the last 20 pages, which is good because apparently that's when it gets really, really good, and I don't want to do any spoiler alerts right here. So first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Well, thank you. I will say, just correct you, I am a Franklin County native. I now live in Macon, just south of Macon, Georgia. I've been there for 40-some years, and I miss my home being Franklin County.
You wouldn't be the first to say that.
Well, I have a sister, a very dear sister, who lives here, and I stayed with her. And I have great friends in Roanoke as well. In fact, I have a friend, James Haynes, who has a restoration company in Roanoke, Virginia. He and I have been, from 5-6 years old, we've been friends. And we served in uniform together, by the way. Yeah, we were in Troop 361 Cub Scouts.
There we go. And you call me cheeky.
Well, he's apparently spent a lot of time in England, so he's picked up on some of your
there you go,
some of your stuff. And
I was also able to reconnect with my very, very dear friend Millard Flora, local musician. He and I played music together in the 1970s, and in fact, I worked on the farm with both James and Millard when I was growing up, and those memories I really, really treasure because they played a significant role in my deciding that I was going to go to school, to college. I was the only one ever in my family to do that, and that working on the farm, getting up hay. And then also later on working in a silk mill in Ferrum, those long hours.
So basically,
I finally decided that there's no way in hell I'm doing this.
So basically, you were running around with some floras and decided you didn't want to do this the rest of your life and get the hell out of here. We can relate.
Okay.
Yeah, to Kate.
We empathise for sure. I don't want to talk about my experiences in square bales, but
or with floras. The only show we've ever recorded that we've never released.
Oh, really?
Featured a flora. Probably related. What'd you say their name was? Your friend was
Millard Flora.
Millard. I don't know if
Millard Flora.
Any related to Van, but we've had Van Flora here on the show, and
maybe I think the Floras generally all.
Yeah, they all kick around in the same circles. But yeah, Caleb's the only show we've ever had. Caleb Flora's the only show we've ever had on here that we could not release.
Couldn't do it.
And then we shot for round 2 a year later, and we got 30 minutes out of him. And then we decided to do the second half of the show after the party, and we all recongregated around the microphone, albeit quite a bit more inebriated than we originally had started off to be in the show. Could have went in a whole different, but poor Caleb, he sat there in a zombie state for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then
I think the pressure overcame him.
It probably did.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to put that down to social pressure.
Yeah,
and gravity.
Yeah, gravity. Oh, he plunked right into the damn floor. I mean, right in the middle of the show, just pop, just hit it. So 2 years, 2 separate opportunities, about 8 hours of time, and we've managed to scrape together 30 minutes of Caleb. But it's still some of the best 30 minutes we got out there. But so many of those stories we've had. on here relate to him through other people, so his spirit does live on. But yeah, I can understand you being like, "No, I just got to get the hell out of here. I don't want to."
It's not that I wanted to leave Franklin County. I did want to go see. We never traveled anywhere. I mean, my daddy had a 4th grade education. My mama had a 7th grade education. My granddaddy, I write about in the book, he could not read or write. He had a farm up in Callaway. So education was not something that was emphasized in my family. That did not mean these were unintelligent people. They were very intelligent. But I wanted to see the world. I really wanted to go places. I'd never been on an airplane. When I graduated from college, I bought a ticket to Europe and traveled on a Eurail pass.
I would recommend, for life experience, if you've got the opportunity to travel, take it. It's treated me very well, and I think the experiences and cultures, and just you become so open-minded with your experiences. It can only do you good,
And you learn a lot about your own culture.
Very much so.
Interestingly enough, because you ask yourself, well, why do we do it that way?
Yeah.
And is this the only way to do it?
Hell no.
No, it's
Oh,
not.
exactly.
But you're right. That's the best education you can get.
Yeah, get out and travel. It definitely, a cliche, broadens the horizons. And I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Me as well.
I hadn't got to travel abroad quite as much.
Where you travelled with, they were shooting at you.
Well, yeah. So, but
That's not good.
No,
Not really.
I've traveled quite a bit in the United States, which is great because I think we've got so many different cultures here and so many different beautiful sights. I mean, you get out west, the Rocky Mountains, the Grand Tetons. I mean, places I didn't even want to come down from. Places are so awesome. Took my wife up there to propose to her. But while I was in Iraq, which is probably the extent of my overseas, of course, spent a little time in Kuwait, and I think 3 days R&R in Qatar. But I never left base, and I gave all
To call
my...
that R&R is a bit of it's a little bit disingenuous.
Yeah, it was basically us on a military base sleeping in basic training barracks in the desert. Like, you could have signed up for all this other stuff and went out here and did, rode jet skis in the Gulf and all this kind of shit, or went here, there, but you had to sign all these passes and be here at a certain time. Basically, it was like rehab for us because they give you 3 beer tickets a day. And
How many?
3.
That's not very many.
No, and people...
That's not even breakfast.
No,
Well,
and it was like...
that's outrageous.
And so we could,
Thanks, Uncle Sam.
people were spending $20 to $50 on a ticket if you wanted to sell yours. But I ended up just giving mine away to other people because I was like, man, we are loaded with booze back in Iraq. This right here is kind of like a detox period for me. So you deserve this. Have it if you ain't got it where you're at, because we literally buy from the Iraqis every single day. We had it going on.
I didn't realise that you were limited for just 3 beer
And you're in
tickets a
Qatar.
day.
You're not even on a combat zone. You're on a friendly base or something. I guess they just didn't want you. I guess they figured if you were there and you were just left a combat zone, then most likely if they didn't put a limit on it, you were going to get stupid.
Well, I managed to get some. It's another story, and I'm not going to bore you with it. But I managed to get on an OP in Belize that was possibly, I think, the only dry OP the British Army had. Now, my connections allowed me to be the supplier of rum, and I was a very popular fellow. But that was the only dry OP, and it was not dry, let me tell you. But technically, it was a dry OP.
Yeah, well, here, it was dry for us.
Unheard of.
At Tallil Air Force Base, but on the same exact Air Force Base, the Italians had a PX where they had liquor flourishing in there. Like, well, Americans can't go in there, but that's like, why? So you're doing this because you don't want to be disrespectful to the host country, but the Italians can come in here and say, fuck off, we're doing what we want to do. I mean, you just invaded this place and you're killing their people that we can't drink liquor to deal with the bullshit you put us through. You know what I mean? Like, so, so we found, but either way, the going abroad thing, although it only took me to Iraq, I still was able to appreciate the things that were over there. Because, for 5 straight months, but every other night we slept in the shadows of an ancient ziggurat that was basically the beginning of our civilization.
Sure.
It's
Yes.
Abraham of the Bible. He was born right next to that ziggurat in this house. It's still standing to this day. We walked through those walls, the place he was born. And and so we got to walk around the ziggurat. There's ancient king tombs that were down in there. We got to kind of walk down there and see, and the stuff kind of just takes you over. Not to mention, you're going over 2 of the 4 rivers in the Garden of Eden about every single day. So you're it's somewhere that most Americans aren't going to go, and you're getting to at least experience something that, and with our job specifically, so we got to go all over. So whereas, most units, they just stayed within a perimeter. The bitch of our job is we went to get shot at every single day, and we were outside the wire every single day, but we got to go all over the country, from Talil down there in Basra, down at the Kuwaiti border, all the way west into the Sunni Triangle, all the way north up into Mosul, Tikrit, west to the Syria. We got to see all of that stuff, where most people just got to see that little section.
And it's an amazing neck of the woods when you consider the culture really emanated from that area.
That's right.
I mean, it's. I don't know. I mean, I fall short of words when it comes to describing that area. It's
Southern Iraq is complete shit. I mean, it's just like as you would expect, wide open desert, nothing. There's just nothing appeasing about it. You've seen it in Texas, you've seen it in Iraq. It's all the same. But when you get to northern Iraq, it's a little different. It's more mountainous. It's a little bit cooler. It's more arid. There's more water everywhere, which is a huge source, in that neck of the woods. So it's a little bit more fertile ground. The people over there, for the most part, they're pretty friendly. Yeah, there were a lot of insurgents and stuff, but I think just like here in America, when you start pinpointing and focusing on one thing, it makes it look really, really bad. Of course, it was to some degree, but most of the people over there were just like us. You know what I mean? And that's getting back to your point. When you travel and you see things, you'll learn that although they have different ways of doing things, at the end of the day, we have a whole lot more likes.
Well, they're dealing with what we all deal with.
Exactly. Bullshit.
I mean, that and just all the challenges of life. So, yeah, that's something that really you come to realize if you do travel, and especially if you live with families. I've lived with families in Brazil and in Italy, and you realize, as you said, they're trying to deal with all the bullshit in life and just trying to do the best they can.
So all the places you traveled to, which one was your least favorite, and why was it England?
What a shocker, Billy. That's such a cheap shot.
Well, I'm sorry. I'll have to say that England is my favorite place. And
look,
and I'm not saying that just as a nod to Simon.
We're not paying you to say that.
Bless you, Philip.
Simon is.
Bless you, Philip.
Yeah.
I'll pay you later, mate.
No, I love England, and I always feel like I'm home when I'm there. We were talking earlier about hiking the southwestern coastal path, or hiking in the lowlands and highlands of Scotland, or going over to Wales. I love Wales. There's a beautiful little town called Tenby I used to travel to. Or down in Salisbury. I love Salisbury. And
you got great barbecue down in Salisbury.
You may have to smack him.
My time will
jump
come.
on 77.
My time will come.
Well, anyway, you asked me the least. Are you serious about the
Yeah,
least?
I'm just curious. Of all the places, what's one place you just kind of like?
I was not happy when I was in Mexico. I studied in Mexico.
Huh.
I wasn't happy there. I was in Mexico City.
And
Mexico City at that time was the largest city in the world. I later on traveled to out to Kuala Lumpur. I like that in Malaysia. I love Malaysia. In Singapore. Of course, Singapore, if you've ever been there, it's a very authoritarian government.
Oh, don't be spitting your chewing gum out.
Oh, you cannot even bring chewing gum into the country. And there's like a $500 fine for not even flushing the commode. I mean, so...
Yeah, I mean, many a person has been beaten for spitting in public. I mean, they'll give you public floggings. It's very authoritarian.
The caning.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's beautiful. Everything is spotless. But the price you pay for that is this authoritarian government. So, yeah. But I think my time in Mexico was not that enjoyable. And right now, I'm not sure if I would go back to Mexico. There are a lot of problems. But anyway, You asked him, so that's
Yeah,
my
you got it.
answer.
Well, that's interesting. I've been close to Mexico, but never quite been there. I've heard varying opinions over it, but Mexico City's a little bit different. Not many people I know have actually dealt with that place very much.
I do love India. I had a fellowship to study there, so I loved India and Mumbai.
I had. It's funny when I was asked oil and gas, where would are you going to prefer not to go to certain places? India was actually one that I said I would prefer not to go to, having been there a couple of times, because the level of poverty there is staggering. It's even. I thought I saw the depths of poverty in West Africa, but I really saw it in India.
Oh yeah.
And the food is amazing.
I love the food. I have to confess that I love to cook, and I love Indian foods. That's another reason why I loved.
Well, you loved England.
Exactly. That's why, because you can get a proper curry.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And I had the authentic curry off the Bay of Bengal. I forget the name of the place. It was amazing. But then we drove across parts of India and driving around Mumbai. I just wouldn't do it. And getting in the rickshaws, I went, hell no.
Talking about the motorized? Yeah, I've ridden those.
I still don't know what side of the road is the legal side to drive on in India. And we drove across the whole damn country.
Well, let me ask you this, Simon. When you were there, did you notice that kids were playing cricket underneath the bridges?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they love cricket.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's...
Very passionate. I mean, it's just like the New Zealand and rugby. India and cricket, it's almost a religion, but you got to be careful about saying that in India because they take their cows and their sacred cows very, very seriously.
And that's something you do see. Cows that plop down in the middle of the road.
Don't touch them.
And you have to drive around them.
Yep. Do not go to touch one of their cows.
Boy, I tell you what, they'd lose their mind up here in Appalachia. I tell you what.
Yeah.
I don't know how they even decided to come. I mean, even probably Texas the same way. It's
they're sacred. You see, you don't have beef in a curry.
They don't. They're
No beef.
Seafood, but not.
Yep.
I know. I would like to go to India. I think it's and mainly because my wife she had friends that were Indian, and we went to one of their weddings. And you want to talk about a shindig? I probably mentioned it on here before. 3 days, like the first. I mean, the ceremony. We're all out there, and you got the dress and the tux and all that stuff going on. The ceremony for us, you're in and out in 20 minutes, sometimes an hour if you're Catholic. But I mean, it's fairly cut and dry. Their ceremony goes on for so long that literally people and family and everybody sits down. And it's just going on forever and ever. People are getting up, going back up there and getting food, sitting around drinking coffee, talking, chatting, going back and sitting, leaving. I mean, it goes on for hours. But food, that's the first time I ever had. That's the first time I ever had anything to that degree, the Indian food. And
I'm a big fan of Indian
I want to
food.
tell you what, it was delicious. Like I thought, because my wife was like, we're going down here, it's a vegetarian menu. But it wasn't, because there was chicken there as well. And I was like kind of rolling. I was like, I'm going to go to Five Guys before we go there. And she's like, no, just. No. And the food was incredible. Like,
get a good butter chicken. It's one of my favorites.
Now, anytime I get a chance, we'll go to the Indian restaurant, Nasabi or whatever it is in downtown Roanoke, and try and eat, me and her. It's really good. And Nawab. Yeah, we'll go there and eat. And I like the tikka masala. Is that something?
Tikka masala.
Yes, that's what I really like. So you can actually get that in Kroger, the sauce. So we get some of that sometime in the private selection, and we'll go make our own stuff here. It's delicious.
And then church it up.
Yeah.
That's the trick with those sauces. Church it up.
Yeah. It's So yeah, India is somewhere that I've got a fascination for. Honestly, I'd like to go to China. I think it looks like it got some beautiful mountains in China.
Oh, yes.
All in the all in Europe as well. They're mountains are in every continent. They just look
beautiful. Yeah.
Beautiful, yeah. And I guess kind of to segue into what you're here for. We've only been going for 30 minutes now.
Now we've been global.
Well, I mean, it kind of relates, because you talk about the mountains in Europe up there, and the Scots Irish and stuff, and now that's kind of who migrated to this area and was the the whole beginnings.
They define a defining role in shaping the culture and traditions of this region. The Scots-Irish who came here settled in the western sections of the county. You'll find that in the eastern sections of the county, they're more English in terms of their ancestry. Of course, the Scots-Irish were joined by the Germans. Many of these were what we call here in Franklin County, Old Order. Of course, many of them moved away from, the church, that is the Old Order churches. But again, it's the Scots-Irish who play the largest role in shaping, the food, music, dance, everyday customs, of course, the language itself. There are words that we use that, you're going to find that are still used in Scotland and also England. I mean, I used to tell my students who happen to be from the South, don't ever let a Yankee tell you that reckon is not a correct word. The English say it all the time. And there's no place in this country where you will ever hear that word used except the South.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you hear the king and, of course, the former queen use that word. Now, I know I'm digressing here, but the thing here is that so much of that culture, the Scots-Irish, as well as the English and so many other, they're still alive. We used to think about, or we used to call the United States a melting pot. Well, I disagree with that. I would say it's not a melting pot. It's more like a Brunswick stew.
There you go.
And the thing here is that if you look at a Brunswick stew, you can see the carrots in there. You can see the okra in there. You can see the pork. You can see the chicken. You can see the onions. You can see the corn. You can see all that. I'm getting hungry. You can see all of this. I mean, so all that's still alive. When we say a melting pot, that suggests that
it got blended.
It got blended and it disappeared.
No, it didn't.
And it didn't disappear. And in this book, that's something I do emphasize, that these people who came over from what was called the Ulster District or the Ulster Plantation in Northern Ireland, they brought all that with them. All that when you think of Franklin County, both the good, the bad, and the ugly, a lot of that was brought over by these people.
I don't know if you ever read Thomas Sowell, but he wrote a book called Black Redneck, White Liberal. Mm-hmm. And, he was talking about how basically if you trace everything back and you kind of, rewind everything back to its roots, a lot of the same culture that's in inner city America these days with black, the black population is the same exact Scots-Irish culture. They learned from each other back before everybody started migrating to the cities. In Sowell's book, he just talks about how they just have this, innate desire to always, family pride, killing people for disrespecting your family. That's something that's still popular, disrespecting your friends, disrespect just in general, and in crazy competitions and things like in Saul's book, he talks about how they would used to have steamboat races up rivers and stuff in the Midwest, and they would end up crashing them drunk and killing everybody on board. And, it kind of alluded to that being, the inner city culture, like drag racing and things, just wild, reckless, abandon, but a lot of honor at the same time. Like he just talks in that book how they all, how basically we're so much more alike than we ever want to give ourselves credit for.
A couple of books called Shared Traditions about white folks and black folks in the South, and that we're actually much more alike than we're different. Because you think about, something, we take for granted, like food. Well, you'll find in New York and other areas, where blacks from the South have migrated, they'll call that food soul food. Well, that's just what we eat down here, whites and blacks. It's collard greens. It's turnip greens. It's fried chicken. By the way, regarding fried chicken, the people who brought this tradition of frying foods, frying fish and frying, where I'm going with this, don't you, Simon?
You're going to lead me there.
Yeah. Actually from England. A very fine book that was written by a historian by the name of David Hackett Fisher called Albion Seed. Albion is an old Greek word for the British Isles. And it's about these 4 migrations to North America. And he details all kinds of folkways. And he argues in there that frying food was not something that they got from Native Americans or anyone else. It was something they brought over. The English loved frying fish and frying chicken.
Yeah,
Fish
don't
and chips.
say.
And frying chips.
Every time we go to a restaurant, if it's on the menu, he's got to get it.
Gotta get chips.
Every time.
Fish and chips.
Every time.
Yeah.
I just got to see if they do it as good as I do.
Pardon?
Fair enough.
Just got to see if they can cook it as well as I do it.
True. I would never get in a competition with you because I'm sure you could do it. Although I love to fry fish. And by the way, when we were talking about London earlier, I have some very, very definite places I go when I want fish and chips.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even going up north as well, go up North Grimsby. Oh, my goodness. Fantastic fried fish. The further north you get, the better it is, in my opinion.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, I mean, you know, I'm a big fan of those traditions, and I normally do fish and chips every Friday.
Well, you know, for example, Trey, cornbread, all of that. This is what you'll find in soul food restaurant. Well, again, that's what we all eat here, and manners of speech, you know, and just what you mentioned before, notions of honor, and that, of course, that has a very ugly side because you mentioned earlier how you can get killed for disrespecting someone.
Hatfields and McCoys.
Well, again, this is something part of what the Scots brought with them. This notion of manly honor. By the way, there's another fine book by a historian by the name of Bertram White Brown, who wrote a book called Southern Honor, Ethics and Behavior in the Old South. And the South was the most violent region of the country in the 19th century. I mean, you gotta remember, these are people who dueled.
Yep.
At the slightest provocation, you could end up in a duel. Now, you may not follow through. You may actually just go through the show itself, even hold your pistol in the air. But you had to demonstrate that you were willing to die for your honor or your family's honor. Of course, there are many cases of people dying in duels. And I'm not sure whether you know this story or not, but one of our presidents, who happened to be Scots-Irish, Andrew Jackson, got into a very famous duel.
Yes, he
Burr.
did.
Are you familiar with that duel?
Absolutely. Aaron Burr.
No,
That wasn't Burr.
That's Hamilton.
That's Hamilton.
Okay, that's Hamilton. Never mind. Jackson.
Aaron Burr killed Alexander Hamilton, whose son, by the way, the year before died in a duel.
That's right.
I don't think Hamilton thought Burr was going to show up and actually do it because, like, back then it was one of those deals where you would just do it to show up and say you're a man to do it. Most of the time they just walk away, apparently. But
Well, the
he got there and
seconds-
Burr wasn't messing around.
In this case, with Andrew Jackson, as a young boy, you know, his mama was from, you know, again, they're Scots-Irish, and his mama told him that, look, if any man slights you, any man defames you, you do not seek restitution in the courts. You get your satisfaction, if need be, using violence, because that's the manly way. That's the honorable way. And Jackson, true to form, became very angry when his wife was insulted by a fellow by the name of Charles Dickinson. Dickinson was a very well-known and respected son of a planter family, in Tennessee near Nashville. And he had brought up the fact that Jackson and Rachel, or rather Rachel, had not gotten a divorce from her first husband when they married. And of course, what he would say is that she was an adulteress. Jackson became incensed. How dare he? And he decided he was going to fight a duel, even though there was a good chance he was going to get killed. Dickinson was the finest shot, everyone said, in Middle Tennessee. And Jackson's friends told him, look, we've seen you shoot. You can't hit the broadside of a barn. Don't go through this with this duel.
Pick sabers.
Yeah.
What did you say?
Pick sabers.
Sabers, yeah. Well, anyway, what happens is Jackson practices, and he decides that on the day of the duel, he would wear an oversized frock coat. We would call it an overcoat. And he also decided that on the day of the duel, when the order was given to fire, he would not fire. He would let Charles Dickinson fire. And of course, he assumed he was going to be hit. But if he could still stand up and raise his arm and aim, he was going to, again, kill Dickinson because he wanted to take his time. And so, just as planned, when the order was given, Dickinson fired, and Jackson was just standing there, even though he knew he had hit him because there was a cloud of dust that rose from his jacket. Nevertheless, Dickinson grabbed his head and said, "Great God, have I missed him?" Well, he hadn't. That ball hit Jackson in the chest and not too far from his heart, and he's bleeding. Jackson now, of course, has the right, according to the code duello, there was an official code, to raise his pistol, cock it, and fire. And Dickinson had to stand there. So he does that. And he pulls the trigger, but the hammer does not hit the pin. It goes halfway. According to the code, he could recock. And he did just that. He recocked, aimed carefully, pulled the trigger. This time the hammer hit the pin, fired, hit Dickinson in the gut. Dickinson dies. Whoa. The physician who happened to be in attendance went over to Jackson and said, "Have you been hit?" He said, "Yeah, I think he's winged me." Well, again, as I said earlier, he was now carrying a ball in his chest, which he carried to the day he died, by the way. And Jackson said after that duel, "I would have killed him if he had shot me in the brain." Now, I tell you this story because Jackson is Scots-Irish. Jackson had these very pronounced notions of honor. He had already, even up to that time, he had been involved in numerous knife fights. And of course, Jackson goes on to become president of the United States, doesn't he?
Yes, he does, and a very successful one.
Yeah, well, it depends on how you define success.
Depending upon how you define it, yes.
Well, I do like him for his what's the word I'm looking for? Objections, basically, to the central bank system. He was heavily against that whole ordeal, and for all his troubles and how much he hated them and how much they hated, what did they do to him? They put him on a $20 bill.
Yeah. Well, Jackson, again, is emblematic, of this kind of culture in the 19th century, by the way, that was very much about this honor, again, particularly in the South, and of course the country was moving westward at that time, and people were actually facing challenges. They were trying to carve out lives, and the frontier was very violent, and they could respect somebody, who might have to kill a man, because in their view, well, Jackson killed somebody, well, he might need to kill him, and yeah, I mean, you find the people that we're talking about here who settled Franklin County, they came from the same place. They shared that same culture. And in the book, for example, there are numerous cases of families going to war with one another, of blood feuds. In fact, I have one chapter in the book called Bad Blood. Lots of conflict over land rights. We were talking earlier, Simon, about how, you don't have the public footpath really in America.
That's right.
You can't walk through somebody's property. Well, there are numerous cases of men killing men because they said they were trespassing. And it's just nuts. I mean, we say...
That's a little extreme, don't you feel?
I think so.
Yeah.
It could be taken a little bit too far. But... yeah, I mean, this is, and of course, even families going to, prominent families going, to war with one another over some slight. I have a chapter in this book called Honor in the Unwritten Law. The unwritten law, as it was known, are you familiar with this?
I'm not. Go ahead.
The unwritten law was if a man slept with your wife. In other words, if you had been cuckolded, if you remember your Shakespeare, if you've been cuckolded, she had dishonored him, or that man had maybe molested her, he could kill him. And you had numerous cases that happened, and they weren't convicted.
A lot of that happens today.
Now, real quick, because I don't think we've said it yet, but the name of the book is Murder and Mountain Justice in the Moonshine Capital of the World. And Phillip Gibbs here is the author. So that's kind of where we hadn't said it yet, but I wanted people to understand.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the title of the book. It's always helpful.
You need to get it out there, right?
I need to get it out there.
Well, we kind of jumped into it. I was kind of curious, because we started on the Scots-Irish, and I was just wondering from Simon's perspective what the cultural view of somebody from where you're from down in, where you from? You're in South of London. So what is y'all's thinking of the Scots-Irish, and what is their stereotype to you all? Like, how do you perceive them in your very culturally relevant part of England?
I mean, I would still say that code of honour exists, amongst the English at the time, and to a certain extent, it still exists today, because you've got an ethical code that you live by. Now, if you can't back that ethical code up and support it by means of litigation or violence, what's the point? So everyone's got their red line somewhere, and if it's a matter of honour and code, I don't necessarily have any objections to that. I probably stand behind quite a lot of it. In fairness,
no, I was just curious that I know what's your perspective on the French are and the Italians. I was just wondering, the Scots-Irish, how do you all look at? Like, well, do you look at them as heathens? Do you look at them as lunatics? Do you?
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm actually called a Scot, as it turns out.
That makes a lot of sense.
Which, yeah, so I'm, I've got that bit of Celt running through me. My great, however many greats, was Lord Chief Justice of Ireland back in the early 1600s.
Right.
So we have a connection there. And I still firmly believe that Ireland should be a united island. I'm not one of these guys that because Northern Ireland is part of the British Isles, I'm not necessarily a supporter of that. Because I've seen what the Troubles have done, and there's a little bit of empathy there that whether you're Protestant or Catholic should really be superseded by, are you Irish first? Now, if you're Irish first, then a united Ireland makes perfect sense, and being Protestant or Catholic really is something you should deal with internally. So, and it's a very complex situation.
It is, yeah. I was going to say that for the Scots-Irish, the Orangemen, in Northern Ireland, they're very proud of their heritage.
Very much so.
They're Protestant, but not only that, they're proud of their Scottish ancestry.
Yeah.
And therein lies the problem. I mean, because they don't think of themselves as Irish first. I may be wrong about that, but
you've got that clan atmosphere, which again, you can almost call it tribal. It's a little bit more evolved than that, but it's still, the family clan you support wholeheartedly without question. Mm-hmm. I get it. And that culture, the clashes with the English and the Scots, the English and the Welsh, the English and the Irish, it's a very complicated story. And I don't think we'll ever have the answers to it. But the culture that's come from it, has, whether you view it as empire building or not, have definitely had a major impact on where we are globally now. So, it's good to reflect back on the origins of that evolution. I mean, and if you don't, you're doing yourself a disservice, because history is one of the things that you need to reflect upon, because you don't want to make the same mistakes twice. And we appear to be in that loop now.
That loop. I agree completely.
Where we're just in a dreadful spot at the moment, because history is going to repeat itself.
Yeah, something you said. You said talked about the story of these people and all people. Just it's very messy.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
History is not something that you can simplify. It's incredibly messy. It's incredibly complicated, and that's why a lot of people they actually kind of resort to wanting to simplify everything.
And that's where you end up making some bigger mistakes.
That's exactly.
Yeah, and I mean it's all about control, whether it's by land, cultural dominance, which is not getting too far from genocide, if you want to look at it in certain respects. So yeah, there's some very ugly elements of history that we should be looking to avert. But if you don't know your history, you are destined to repeat it. And that should be very troubling, because we can avert so much of it through historical reference and not repeating it, but we choose to ignore it and go down the same path, which is all about control, greed, and all the unpleasantness that humanity appears to regurgitate, on a fairly consistent cycle.
Well said. Would you like to know how I came to write this book?
Well, that was going to be my next question, because I was jumping into it, and I was going to start asking you questions about how some of this, the honor killings and stuff relate. But
how it came about?
Yeah, but the book, it seems like it was
in 1978. I was a student at East Tennessee State University, and I had just gotten the word that a childhood friend of mine, we went to Boone's Mill School together, and also Franklin County High School, that he had just been murdered, and the killer was a notorious moonshiner who many suspected had killed his first wife or had someone kill her. He was never convicted. And I thought to myself at that time, someone needs to write the story, because I knew it was going to be a larger story about not just this killing, but the culture of this region, and more specifically Franklin County. And I put it aside for years and years and years. And I went on to graduate school, went on, got a PhD, became a college professor, and did a lot of academic writing, that kind of thing. Then later retired in 2015. Kind of lost my way when I retired, What do I do now? Luckily, I have tennis and music and a lot of other hobbies. But in fact, for a while there, I thought, well, maybe I like to draw. I'll try drawing. Then I realized
you couldn't draw.
I'm not worth a shit. So
at least you tried.
I tried, yes.
There you do. The Lord loves a trier.
Yeah. But I finally decided, you know what? I'm going to write the story. But it was at the urging of my childhood friend, James Haynes. It was one night in Roanoke at his house. I was going on and on about this story. And finally, he'd had enough. He went back into his office there, came out with a notepad. He said, I want an outline in 3 months.
There you go.
And I said,
put up or shut up.
That's right, put up or shut up. And I said, I took up the challenge. And so on the way back home to Georgia, that's an 8-hour drive, by the way, I laid that book out. I laid it out in my head. And it changed, obviously, with the research. But basically, I stayed pretty true to the structure that I had conceived for that book. And a year later, the book was finished. Now, I had pitched the book to a number of presses, and one press that really wanted the book was the History Press, which ultimately became the publisher. And they wanted it for their True Crime and History series. Mm-hmm. And before they would publish the book, they wanted not only to see the outline of the book, but they wanted to see if I could actually write true crime. So that I sent them a chapter that I'd already written. So I went to the editorial board, and they looked it over, and they came back to me and said, we love it. We want to give you a contract. And so I signed a contract with the History Press. We had to negotiate on the royalties and all that, but they said, "Can you do it in 160 pages? Because we don't want, a tome. We want something a little bit slimmer,
Punchy.
exactly punchy." And I am one thing. I am is I believe in being a concise writer. I believe in using a nickel word instead of a 50-cent word in many cases. I think because you don't want to turn off the reader, and I believe in very clear writing. But anyway, I got it done, and that's where I am right now. It came out July 17th, and it's been doing very, very well. I'm very happy with it. But
No, it's just going in for another print, right?
I'm sorry.
It's just going in for another print.
Yeah, I'll be going in for another print. Yeah.
Sweet.
I'll
That's
be
a
going
sign
to
of
another
success.
print. Yeah. So, and I was telling Billy earlier, I did a little song and dance down to Bassett Historical Center. They wanted me to come down there and do a little program, talk to them about the book and all that, and got down there. It was on Tuesday of last week, and I saw all these people filing into that center, and I was thinking, "Oh, what the hell's going on here? I better go in and check it out." Well, then I discovered they were there.
That was your audience.
That was my audience. It was packed. I couldn't believe it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and so I go in there and have a wonderful, back and forth with the audience. I don't believe in lecturing or reading. I like to have, engagement with the audience.
Yep.
We had that, and they can't sell books there because they're a charitable organization. So they'd asked me if I'd bring some books. So I did. I brought 40 books. They bought every one of them.
Sweet deal.
So I had to reorder books because I have so many more signings. But back to the book, that is the first chapter of this book is called "A Year for Murder," because Terry Flora was my friend. I didn't mention his name earlier, but his murder was just one of 9 murders that happened in the span of roughly 8 months in Franklin County. Some of those murders were described by Sheriff Quint Overton, as the most brutal and the most horrific he had ever seen in his life.
Wow. And we've had his name mentioned here many, many, many times.
Yeah. Well, there were a couple of them that were execution style.
In high regard, I may add. He's viewed in high regard here.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
And he would be the sheriff who would be charged with investigating and solving those crimes. Now, in that chapter, A Year for Murder, what I have there is what I would call the hook, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean.
It's the hook. Because following that chapter are chapters that deal with the history of Franklin County in terms of the coming of the Scots, in terms of the blood feuds, in terms of the moonshining, in terms of conspiracy, corruption, in terms of the vigilantism. A lot of people are not aware there was a lot of that. If you step outside the bounds of propriety in many respects, you could get killed, particularly if you happen to be someone who informed on a moonshiner. That happened. It did happen. You could be ambushed. But I also discovered there were cases where you had young men, and of course, being young men, become hot-headed, and they become very jealous, and they see somebody who is a competitor for the affections of a young girl that they've had their eye on, and they end up killing somebody.
That was an interesting story in the book. I'm not going to give it away. I want you to go read it, but that was because the whole mistaken identity, all that.
Mistaken identity.
That was a really good.
Thank you.
I really like
appreciate
that.
it. And of course, I'm glad you bring that up because as a historian, I insisted that I document everything I wrote about. I did not want to be accused of making anything up. That's, obviously it's a no-no if you're a historian. And so I stuck to the facts. Granted, at times I might speculate based on the facts, but not include anything that did not happen. So I did a lot of research. Made a lot of trips up here, spent a lot of time looking at newspapers, other documents. Obviously, I went to secondary sources as well. But yeah, that was something I really...
So nine murders in 1 year in this county, and we don't get to hear a lot about that. Funnily enough, I've never heard that statistic, and that's quite an alarming statistic. Particularly, I want to throw a slight tangent here. How does your book reference the film that was made here, Lawless, and the...
I was going to get into that.
The Bond
because the
family.
book will kind of ruin the movie for you a little bit.
My book?
Well, yeah, yeah, it'll ruin the movie for you a little bit.
It probably will.
But they've
well, that's Hollywood. I mean,
Hollywood really twisted the whole events and stuff. I'll let you take, but it did. It kind of
actually, I'm glad you brought this up because, well, again, it is a Hollywood.
Exactly,
it's a Hollywood film, but even the novel on which it was based, The Wettest County in the World, played
more loosely with
fast and loose with the facts. I mean, it's based on a true story. There's no debating that. However, much of the story in the book, as well as in the movie, it's just not true. It's just not true to really what happened, or really who the Bondurants were.
Right.
The Bondurant boys appear in my book. They, especially in relation to the 1935 Moonshine Conspiracy. In the movie, and if I recall in the book, the Bondurants were portrayed as sort of these hill folk. Well, they weren't from the hills; they were from Snow Creek.
Yep.
And once more, they were not anyway poor people. Their daddy was a supervisor.
They're still there.
Franklin, I'm sorry.
They're still there.
Yeah, and
same district.
And what's more, in the movie, as well as the book, they portrayed as refusing to pay the granny fees. Now,
right.
the granny fees were fees that you paid to the sheriff's deputies, and perhaps ultimately wound up in the Commonwealth's attorney's office, who, of course, as you know, if you know that's about that conspiracy, he was charged with running this conspiracy, but was acquitted. And, of course, I'm referring to C. Carter Lee, grandnephew of Robert E. Lee.
I did not know that until I read the book.
Yeah. And what happened is that the Bondurants were portrayed, as I said, as not paying the fee. I think in the movie, Forrest tells them, "Look, I'm a Bondurant. I'm not cooperating." No, that's not true. They were paying the granny fees. Forrest testified that they were paying the granny fee. They did get shot up because it was believed that they hadn't paid the granny fee, and they had. And in fact, Forrest and Jack wound up in Lewis Gale Hospital.
That was a famous shootout at the end of the movie that didn't go anyway in the movie as it did in real life.
And of course, we did not have, the Chicago mob down here with Tommy guns,
right,
blasting away.
That's Hollywood.
That's Hollywood. It did not happen.
Did that shootout take place at the Boone's Mill rail station?
No, it took out down 122, I think, somewhere.
It was at the excuse me, I misspoke. At Maggotty Creek Bridge. That's where it occurred. It was actually around, I think, 122.
That is literally a couple football fields away from our property.
That's exactly right. I know exactly where that is.
A couple football fields away.
Check my facts on that, but
I think you're right as well, because we've had Henry Law on this show multiple times, and Henry's alluded to that as well. He said that it actually took place down 122. I'm pretty sure. And
yeah,
but a lot of local folk around here when that film came out. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on the film because it's obviously Hollywood bullshit. But a lot of folks around here were saying that it portrayed the county and this area poorly because it elevated the violence that was depicted in the film. But now I understand the film was, all about Hollywood, so you've got to throw in Tommy guns. Why not? Tommy guns are great, right?
Right.
You've got to throw in nasty feds from Chicago. Absolutely. Probably a child molester too. So you throw in all these things. It's very Hollywood. But what you're telling me now is the backstory behind the history was there was a lot of violence, probably more so than depicted in the film, over a course of a number of years.
Well, again, I go back to actually the mid 18th century and then move all the way through. I mean, in the late 19th century, you had a lot of violence. That you had moonshiners, and you might recall from reading the book, Billy, that there were mountaineers in the western part of the county who actually had armed camps to protect
from the revenuers.
Right. And revenuers, they would organize, and go up there, and they would shoot their horses out from under them. And I mean, it was bloody.
That was something that nobody ever talks about. That's, once again, why you'd have to get the book. That's something else that nobody I've ever heard talk about, was that fortress up there at Shooting Creek, like how fortified it was and how well, like you're talking about a kick-ass freaking militia up on that mountain.
They had a cannon.
Well, we have one of those too.
We've got one of those.
Well,
really, I have a cannon.
I'm very envious. I want a cannon.
So we need to bring him back up. You're gonna have to definitely come back up for another show at some point in time, and we'll do the next one up on Simon's property because the cabin's got a lot of historical value. What about the cannon and stuff? Because I know good and well when I get to everything I want to get to this show. This has been fascinating.
And they say from where we're on top of a hill in Callaway, and the stories were that you could see all the moonshining fires at night, all the smoke from the creeks and the distilling process, and apparently the whole side of the mountain would light up with these fires, and you could pinpoint, if they weren't careful, where all the stills were. Now there's a still actually not more than a few hundred yards on another farmer's property by my house. Mm-hmm. So we know it was prevalent. So if they're looking at protecting their income, I'm going to empathise a little bit.
Well, my granddaddy made liquor in the 1920s because, as you know, we had Prohibition came into 1918 by virtue of the 18th Amendment. Of course, one of the
stroke of genius.
Yes, one of the stupidest.
Absolutely.
Laws or amendments that we actually have had in the history of this country, but it was a gift. It was a gift to these
organized crime,
but also was a gift to people like my granddaddy and others.
I'm
used to trying to eke out a living on the side of a hill, and you don't have an education. You do some logging, and you got to feed a family. What you do, you're going to make some liquor because there is a demand for it.
Now that's the same. You can say the same story now. If everything went to shit, there's two things that people would trade for willingly and pay well over the odds: tobacco and liquor. Now, the easier thing to make is liquor, because if you're thinking about making tobacco, you need a plantation.
And
time. It's a process.
I've worked some in tobacco, and let me tell you what, that's hard work.
Yeah.
Now, making liquor, in the 19th century and early 20th century, was also hard work. It was very hard work. Of course, with the coming of automobiles, and some other improvements.
Well, it made distribution a little easier.
A lot easier. And that's another thing I do in this book. I tell a story of the liquor running itself. And in fact, there's one fascinating character in the book who was caught up in the 1935 conspiracy trial. And her name was Willie Carter Sharp. She was from Floyd County. And she was thought to be, according to some, she was a very beautiful lady. But she ran liquor for a moonshine ring in that area and also in Roanoke. and she was a very, very skilled driver. She she could negotiate, those switchbacks in the mountains, and she was not afraid of speed. And she said in an interview that there were a lot of fine Virginia ladies who wanted to ride with her. They wanted that thrill. They wanted that. You hear the blue bloods of Virginia, but
getting their hands dirty,
exactly.
A little bit of risk. Oh, I love it.
They love it, and the
So
thing
do I.
is, yeah. Well, we all
Come on.
you had Henry Law on the program. Now, Henry, I cite Henry in my book, a wonderful source, and Henry. And by the way, a shout out to his book, 100 Proof. But he says in that book, there was a tremendous thrill that he got, making liquor and also eluding, revenuers. And that was something that he admired about his daddy, that, he lived on the cutting edge.
But they had their code, and Henry Lee's taught about this code many, many times with us about not resorting to violence. If they were able to restrain you and they got you, they got you.
They got you.
But that's what's so crazy about your book, is your book goes back so far back in history that it talks about the different time periods. And in fact, now I hadn't got all the way to the end, but it really, most of yours is talking about the animosity between revenue agents and moonshiners.
But I do state in that book, you had more animosity in the late 19th century than you did in the 20th century. It changes.
Yeah.
Because it was, it's just what you said, Simon, that, a lot of these old boys needed work, didn't they? And they got jobs working as revenuers or working with the sheriff's department. And there was, as you say, a code that you respect the fact they're trying to take care of their families. And if they catch you, they catch you, okay? Right. But you don't use violence. You don't kill them.
Right.
Now, there was an exception to that code. And I mentioned this in the book, that if, in fact, you were a moonshiner and suddenly you decide that you're going to start cooperating with the authorities, this is different. And there were those who lost their lives as a result of that. You were a turncoat. But you didn't have the same animosity toward those who just trying to feed their families.
Well, I think there continues to be a human hatred of tax collectors. Okay, we all hate paying tax. Most of us here view it as theft. Now, when they're physically coming out to shut you down, I can understand that you're going to do everything in your power to avoid being caught, because you're just a revenuer. So, I don't have a lot of empathy with the revenuers, because, the prohibition was just nonsense, and it created a far bigger problem than I think has ever been fully acknowledged. So I empathise with the moonshiner there, certainly, because I think revenuers are thieves.
Well, it's modern day ATF agents, which that's a whole nother.
That's a whole other
thing
matter, isn't it?
But the thing I like about Henry, and the reason I'm glad you brought him up is, on one of our shows, I think we've had him on here 3 times in and out. And one of the shows we had him on, I asked him, I said, in your opinion, from the stories you've heard from your dad and your, grandparents, stories that you can hear firsthand, essentially, what was a crazier time period, most dangerous? And without hesitation, he said the 30s and the 40s and stuff. But, we didn't even get a chance to dive back into the, 1800s, which your book does, which I didn't even know. You know what I mean? Like, I really thought we became more prominent in the 30s, but, with this book right here, you start learning, and it goes back way further than that. And the craziness goes back way further than you can imagine.
Well, it goes back. It goes back to the Revolution. When the rejection of King George's tax with Stamp Acts and various other pieces of lunacy, but then when the Revolution was won, they still had to go back, and Washington was quite unpopular for increasing the tax on liquor. and there was a number of skirmishes.
Did it lead to the Whiskey Rebellion?
The Whiskey Rebellion
Yes, it
in the
did.
1790s, but there were similar little rebellions, not the same size or as the rebellion in western Pennsylvania. But yeah, you're right, and
And that's the irony there. Actually, is fascinating that you've gone from one form of taxation with the king to another form of taxation with your constitutional republic. And to me, I have a little chuckle as an Englishman thinking, yeah, did you just... The grass isn't necessarily greener on the other side. Playing devil's advocate and thoroughly enjoying this moment, by the way. I have a good chuckle about that. But yeah, it's a fascinating start. And I think it was probably a lot more violent after the Revolutionary War than it was maybe up to the 20s and Prohibition, and then Prohibition kicks a new animal off completely. So it's just a fascinating time and history of the culture here. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's fascinating.
May I go back to Willie Carter Sharp just for she was caught
You
up.
read my mind. I was getting ready to say, let's go back to her.
Willie Carter Sharp, she ends up testifying in the trial, the Moonshine Conspiracy trial. And then later on, she didn't serve any time or anything like that. But she goes out to St. Louis, and then I lose track of her. I can't find any information about her. Well, what I did run across is that there is a bar in France. I forgot the name of the town. I mentioned the town's name, called the Willie Carter Sharp Bar.
In France, she did something right.
And there's a likeness of her, on the outside the bar, and it's Willie Carter Sharp. It's the same woman we've been talking about. She became, this was all in the newspapers, in the Richmond Dispatch, some of the other newspapers, that she was kind of this moonshine heroine. And of course, and it helped being exotic, kind of an exotic looking woman. And by the way, a novel was written about Willie Carter Sharp. Sherwood Anderson, the American writer and publisher, he published, a novel. And I'm trying to remember the name of the novel. It's off the top of my head.
I was reading about it earlier. I was going to tell you real quick. It is 1348 Ave, Delamere, Raymond der Grand, 34,000 Montpellier, France.
That's it. Montpellier.
Yeah.
Montpellier.
So, and
by the way-
I saw and actually screenshot. I think
Montpellier. Let's get
are
it
you
right.
are you really?
Montpellier. I'm just, if you're going to do cultural appropriation, let's do it right.
I wasn't trying to culture appropriate. I was just trying to not sound like a complete and total dipshit when I was trying to read somebody who took 3 years of French in high school. Just let me remind you.
By the way, the novel.
I was looking for that because I thought
I can't speak French. In order to get a PhD, you have to be able to read 2 languages, and I had learned to read French. God, speaking something different. But by the way, the title of the novel is Kit Brannon.
Yes.
Kit Brannon, and it was based on Willie Carter Sharp.
I'm going to try and find a copy of that and hunt one down.
Yeah, you can. I think you can go on Amazon.com and you can find a copy. Yeah.
Because I know, because I started really getting interested in all this stuff, even more so when I started the show. And I've actually went, and I'm glad you brought her up. I'm glad she was in the book a little bit because I got a little bit more of it. I went to the Historical Society up here not too long ago, and I asked him all the information I could have on her. And she didn't really divulge much. And I was, kind of, it's like, why, and she said, well, a lot of the thing, I think her family might not want it to be out there or whatever, but there was no mention of this. There was no mention of the bar or anything. So there's obviously a little bit more to her than there is, because I wanted somebody to come on here and have an entire show dedicated to her. But I don't know if there's enough information out there.
I don't know either. I really want to do as much research as I can. Like I said, she would, it may mean a trip to St. Louis, try and track all this down. But she just basically disappears after that. And but then again, I found that bar, and it was the damnedest thing. I said, good Lord. All the way from Floyd County
Yeah, to France.
Yeah, to France.
How does that? That happens through notoriety. So there's a story there somewhere.
It does. I mean, Henry has brought her up before. He brought it up on the last show, I think, and I just like I said, it's been difficult. I want to find somebody because I think that's another Franklin County icon, and something else to to bring a little bit more notoriety to this area. That's something right there. The fact that she has a bar in France,
We should
be
have a
something that
Willie
Franklin-
Carter Sharp bar here, in Franklin County.
Well,
I think you know what.
Okay, Simon, that's your charge.
here we go.
Soon, I think soon we're going to be able to. I have had a dream of putting a tap house here in town at some point in time, and that might just be the way to go. Something to that degree.
There's a fine drinking establishment that's come about, and I'm sure you know some of the history behind the Social House, the old sugar mill warehouse, and the moonshine cars that are in the basement that were bought
Exactly.
as a result of the
Aren't
fire.
they going to have like a glass floor or something so you can see them?
I'm not sure how they're going to do that, but I know that the area in the basement there is preserved, and they're looking to preserve it. But the fact that the frames and some of the I think we've got some blocks in there, some engine blocks. There's not a great deal left of the cars themselves, but they're there in the collapsed basement as a result of the fire, next to the courthouse. So we know that money had exchanged hands, because you're not running moonshine with 3 Go Faster moonshine cars right next to the courthouse under the eyes of, unless you've got balls of brass steel.
Or you're paying off somebody.
Or someone got paid off. So I'd love to know if there was any more story behind that, because we've been there several times, and to me it's a glorious piece of local history.
Well,
the fact
I haven't
that
made
they're
it
still there.
but I do want to go, and as you say, it's glorious. I mean, my goodness.
Yeah.
By the way, you mentioned the cars there. In the book, I do spend a little time talking about the kind of cars that were used, and everyone knows this story, I think, about how they souped up those cars. And of course, one of the cars that was, I guess, preferred was the 1940 Ford Deluxe. It had I'm sure, was it a flathead or was it a V8? I can't remember right now. But that had lots of horsepower. And, a lot of these cops.
Are you sure it wasn't a Chevy? Please don't say it was a Ford.
Probably was. Had to have been. But what Ford didn't do? I don't think they were bailed out.
That's very true.
That's why Amos stopped buying Chevys. He's a man of principle.
Yeah.
I still got mine out there because I'm going to run until the wheels fall off. That's just me anyway. I'll drive anything. The cars, and that was a fascinating part of the book too, because you was talking about how, hey, look, just the revenue agents, they just didn't have the money to be able to afford cars to be able to keep up. And these moonshiners, they're making money hand over fist. They can soup their cars up and just
this was true
dust.
throughout the 1930s, not just in case of moonshine, but there was a crime spree in the 1930s. You're often with John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd. You're familiar with Bonnie and Clyde. Well, they would steal cars that actually they were high powered, and they would also break into armories and grab those Thompson machine guns, and also
the BAR.
Exactly, the BAR. I was trying to think of it now.
Yeah,
and
30-06 coming at you,
and and so the lawmen were out. Well,
outgunned and outnumbered and
exactly.
Did Pretty Boy Floyd have any ties to Franklin County? Because I know in the movie they alluded to that, but I didn't know if he ever had any.
No, I can't find any connection to Franklin County.
I think that's who it was that was portrayed in that movie.
I don't,
Lawless.
Well,
Floyd Banner. Not Pretty Boy Floyd.
That
it was Floyd Banner.
Floyd Banner, played by Gary Oldman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was Floyd Banner somebody that had ties? Because that apparently
Floyd Banner. I don't even know if Floyd Banner is even a.
He could be a fictitious figure.
Could be.
And of course,
it's Hollywood.
And he looked like he actually was portrayed as someone connected to the Chicago mob.
Yes.
So Pretty Boy Floyd.
That's right. I got those.
He was never
up.
connected to anything like that.
I got those mixed up. Yeah. Were there any connections to the mob other than probably our product making its way up there at some point in time?
Other than just running liquor Liquor was being run in the 1930s from West Virginia had a close connection. You probably read about the brothers who were accused of murdering Simmons,
Yes.
Patrolman Simmons, over on 220 between Roanoke and Boone's Mill. They eventually discovered that they didn't do it because a confession was made by a man later on, said he was responsible. But actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke, because I'm referring to Jeff Richards. But yeah, a lot of liquor going to West Virginia and then it's finding its way up into Pittsburgh, and on to Philadelphia. A lot of it's some of it's being flown, by the way. Even as in the 1930s, they were flying it in.
Well, there's a certain point where your market threshold is
saturated.
It's going to be saturated, but there's going to be a demarcation where you're getting the importation of liquor coming across the Great Lakes from Canada.
Right.
So at a certain point, you're going to find that there's the Canadian influence, and then there's the local influence, and the market really from Canada is probably going to be Chicago, and not coming up from, little old Franklin County. So I can see Franklin County maybe being a regional player.
Help yourself to some ice too, by the way. In there, we're not professional on it.
No, not professional at all.
But at the same time, I know you say this, Simon. But at the same time, there's a reason why the Franklin County moonshine was so well sought after, and and even Henry alluded to this. I think it's something about the water up here. The water that comes out of these mountains.
Oh, the foothills.
It is definitely it's why they say New York pizza tastes different than anything else. It's because they get that shit water from under the city and they make their dough, and everybody just got used to it because everybody wants something to cheer for in New York. But the water down here, the quality, that springs, they always setting up in good spots. And Henry talks about this in his book a lot, like the strategic planning.
Thousands of creeks and springs in Franklin County. We have an abundance of water, which made it. That's what you got to have if you're going to make liquor, and as you said, good liquor. But
that's very much like the analogy with Guinness. I mean, Guinness to me, you can try and make Guinness locally, but when you've had Guinness from the waters of the Liffey in Dublin, you can't touch it.
Well,
so it's all about.
Caleb will talk about that with Texas just getting Yingling. He said they got it, and I think they brew it down there somewhere, but it's just not the same because it's not the same good water quality.
So it's definitely something it's in the water. And I can see that the foothills and some of the springs that we have the clarity and purity of the water that's been going through one of the oldest mountain ranges in continental US. You can see that the minerals in there and everything, it has its own unique characteristic, and that has to be reflected in the product that it's producing, whether it's spring water or moonshine.
Well, there's also, and I think Billy alluded to this, is a great pride, in producing, a liquor that, just as you said, has that kind of quality. It's unmistakable compared to liquor in other places, and I've had liquor in other places. It doesn't compare. In fact, I told you I'm a professional musician, and I play a lot. We play about every weekend up and down the southeastern United States. And I guess I have to confess that, I would run liquor down there and sell it.
How do you think I paid for that degree on the wall up there?
Yeah, sell it. A lot of my gigs, and they wanted that mountain liquor. They wanted that Virginia mountain liquor. And believe it or not, some of them had heard of Franklin County. And this is before the movie came out. I mean, the thing is, they had heard of it.
Oh, it's the movie did an injustice in certain respects, but the reputation was already there.
Well, I actually, the liquor I was telling you about behind me here, it's the Bill Elliott Rye whiskey. I got that. I'm saving that for an event. But when I bought that a couple years ago, the Indian wedding I was telling you about, we went to. My deal with the wife was, all right, if we're going to go down here, I'm going to go all the way to Atlanta, And they had the nerve to have a wedding in March, 1 month before baseball season starts. So I can't even get in there and make a game. I said, so I want to stop by Dawsonville, Georgia on the way back home, watch a little bit of the race there, eat at the Dawsonville Pool Hall, which is, it's Bill Elliott's hometown. And of course now Chase Elliott. I just remember this place as a kid, an old VHS seeing, and they got the Georgia Racing Hall of Fame, all this stuff. In the Georgia Racing Hall of Fame, they also have a distillery in there, is where I got the Bill Elliott rye whiskey. And me and the guy got to have a discussion there about moonshine and stuff, and I was like, I'm from the Moonshine Capital of the world, and he kind of just snickered and was like, I think we're the Moonshine Capital of the world down here, and he said, back in such and such time period, he said, we had more stills busted than anywhere else in the country. I said, well, that's the difference is we just didn't get busted.
That's right.
We didn't get busted. Yeah. I said, because there, and it kind of took him aback a little bit. He seemed insulted. I'm like, look, Google right now, Moonshine Capital of the world, Franklin County's popping up. I mean, we had them everywhere. I mean, this is where NASCAR racing started. It's where the basis for all these movies are from. It's where the basis of the TV show Moonshiners is from, for the most part. I know Dawsonville kind of claims it. I think Wilkesboro, Carolina kind of claims it. And there's a couple other places out there that kind of, you want to sell a few T-shirts, fine, but you're bullshitting yourself. Franklin County is head above heels, the Moonshine Capital of the world.
It was. I'm not sure now. I'm not sure how. I haven't been out of the county for some time now, so I don't know how to speak to that. But y'all would know better than I.
Well, I think the art of moonshine has probably, I'm not going to say it's been lost, but it's past its peak.
I think there's still a bunch of people in this town that are still having their own little mini operations going on, and they're still producing it.
I think you're right.
I know they're right.
Well, I have to tell you, when I get it. I get it from the county, and I was running it, and because I never made a direct connection to the source. I went to a middle person, but one of my good friends. But and
they're still around here. But as we've talked to Henry about this, it's like you can't have an operation like they used to. You can't have a still operation.
You can't have submarine stills.
Nope. You might as well just go legal, which is what Henry did, because you can't. I mean, nowadays they've got unlimited money, essentially, if they want to go after you. They've got drones, they've got infrared, they've got everything in the world. Not to mention, you've got social media out there and people just with big mouths, and you can't get away with the stuff like in the book, and it details this a lot. There's so many different situations and cases where, hey, at the end of the day, either somebody was acquitted, or they didn't see the jail time that you would expect for a lot of murders and violence to take place. These days they throw you in jail for 35, 40 years, whereas back then
just for breaking the speed limit.
Yes.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to clarify with regard to the book, it upset me in that the Amazon mistakenly said that the murders in 1978 were linked to moonshine and bootleg. Well, that is not true. I told my editor to correct that. That is not true. I did not want to mislead people. And there was a double murder connected to drugs, but those other 7 murders had nothing to do with moonshine. Now, it did involve one notorious moonshiner by the name of J. Brew Philpott, and you've all heard that name if you have lived in Franklin County. Mm-hmm. But I just want to clarify that. So much of the violence had to do with what we were talking about earlier, land rights or trespassing, jealousy, someone being cuckolded, again, family rivalries, this kind of thing. Because the book is not solely about moonshine. It's about, again, I like to keep emphasizing, it's about this culture in which moonshine happened to be part of. And you could argue that if you do have a culture that really, and this is true to Scots-Irish openly defied authority. They did not want anybody telling them what to do.
I think that's still prevalent.
Yeah. My wife would agree.
We don't want anybody telling us what to do. I mean, I know.
I think
my wife tells me
my
that.
wife
You just
would
don't want
agree.
anybody telling you what to do. Well, you know what? You're damn right. I don't
wish
want
she was
anybody
up
telling
here. I wish she was up here for this moment.
Even though
right
it
now.
might be good for me, and that's the stupid part of it.
Well, that's the cultural part of it, then you come into, well, it's the chicken and egg that chicken and egg scenario. I think the culture precedes the moonshine. And when it all got wrapped together, maybe with, the revenue was overreaching or some stupid law called prohibition came into being, well, then everyone swung around and said, kiss my ass.
Right.
We ain't playing that game. And in fact, the fact that you're putting that game into play is actually going to make me a lot more money through your stupidity from enacting a law that was absolute lunacy.
It was lunacy.
So, I get it. But you're right, the cultural thing with regards to leave us the hell alone is very much a Scots-Irish thing.
Yeah, and I think it's alive today. I mean,
I think it's alive and kicking today, let me tell you.
And for good and bad. I mean,
Well, I think we've got such an overreach now with governance that we've got to a point where, the rejection of certain elements of government is absolutely justified. There's some overreach and madness that is going on that quite frankly, it's way more serious than the stupidity of saying alcohol is banned. Right? It's now running so much deeper, and I think a lot of people are just sick and tired of poor governance, which is where we're at. So hey, this is the place to be. In my mind, there's some free thinking. We can express ourselves culturally, and reject government overreach, which is exactly where we are now. So yeah, I think that element is now bubbling to the surface again, and it does that.
But it's manifesting itself in some very ugly ways.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's I can agree with you completely regarding the overreach and also just often incompetence. But now we're seeing something we haven't seen in this country before.
Well, the divisiveness.
The thing
through...
we're also talking about demagoguery.
Oh, absolutely.
This is what's scary. We haven't had that before. And
how do you fight that? Apart from rejecting it wholeheartedly.
This is what I was going back to. I'm going to go back to when Billy and I were talking earlier about our college experiences. The true value of an education that is a liberal arts education is to know when a man is speaking rot. And, I'm afraid we have people who in this country, I think that they're so much about wanting to own the other side, right? Wanting, and it's almost a hate. I hate them so much that I'm willing to follow this demagogue. I'm willing to be part of a cult. And I'm not going to question it because I hate these people so much, and it is really frightening. Now we're not in the place that we were in 1861. We're
Absolutely not.
Far from that. Far from that.
The division that we see now in society cannot be fixed with a Band-Aid.
No, it cannot. I don't know how you do it. I really don't, and I don't know. I mean, people a hell of a lot smarter than I are talking about this, and they have no idea. They don't know how you fix it. But some of it is part of this culture that we've been talking about. I'm sure you're both familiar with James Webb, former senator.
Yes.
Also was at one time the Assistant Secretary of the Navy.
I'm talking about Jim Webb, though.
Jim Webb.
From Virginia.
Yeah.
Ran for president, I think in 2016.
Yeah, briefly.
But he made more sense, in my opinion, than any other Democratic candidate.
I supported him. I supported him because I thought he made a lot of sense, and he had a lot of integrity. He was a veteran.
Yes.
He wrote a book called No, it wasn't Friendly Fire. I can't remember it now. But he wrote another book years later called Born Fighting. And guess who that book is about? the Scots-Irish. And sometimes, you know what? It's like one wag said, the Scots, and I think it's true, the Scots-Irish as well, like nothing more than a good grievance.
Yeah. It loves company.
It loves company.
It loves company. Absolutely. Yeah, it loves company. There's two things I've always said, and I put this down to life experience. I will never drink with a Scot or fight a Russian, because I will lose on both occasions.
Yeah.
So, that's the reverence I hold the Scots with. I mean, they are a feisty bunch, very independent. And,
Still talking about independence.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which I think probably is insane, but they're still talking about it.
Yep. And that's that fighting spirit, and I at some point you've got to stand up somewhere. And I think we're well beyond that right now. Mm-hmm. I don't know where we're going as a society, but it is in a very, very, very dark place.
I'm afraid you're right. I think that we have people who are willing to overlook things that people would never have overlooked before in terms of behavior.
Well, it's intellectual superiority as well. When you assume the mantle of being intellectually superior, there's a very offensive arrogance to that, and the political divide is feeding on it.
I think I saw an episode, interview with David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart on NPR on the NewsHour, and David Brooks was talking about that. That there's this, what you have a lot of people who are angry because they think that these intellectual elites are trying to tell them what to do.
Well, we've seen intellectual economics fail miserably. Mm-hmm. So, when they're coming out with theoretical politics, and I still harp back on, and it simplifies it way too much, but it's an easy way to do it. If I can have a political discussion with a true Democrat, and I don't view myself as Democrat or Republican, but if I can have a conversation with a true Democrat, and I have conservative aspirations, I can probably find an area in which we can compromise.
Very good.
We can have a discussion. But with what I'm seeing now with the progressive left, that is not the case. Because they assume that intellectual superiority, I'm right and what I say goes. And there is no compromise, so they're not actually listening. Now, whether that makes them a fascist or not, which again is another argument where they say, well, they're left-wing or progressive or Marxist or whatever, they can't be fascist. Fascism isn't unique to being right-wing. Now, when we accept that...
Well, I would say that fascism... I think what you're talking about is more totalitarianism.
Which is totalitarianism, exactly.
Because, for example, Soviet Union had a totalitarian government.
Very much so.
So did Hitler's.
Mussolini.
And Mussolini. These were totalitarian governments.
Genghis Khan.
Yeah, but fascism is very much about arguing that I am superior to you because of my ethnicity, my nationality, and that everyone needs to march in lockstep. Now, I can see some common...
There's some common ground between fascism and totalitarianism. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a thin line.
It is a thin line.
Yeah.
And but I agree with you. This is the problem. You got the wacky left, and you got the wacky... I don't even want to call them conservative, because I consider myself a conservative. They're not conservatives.
No.
They're
both as bad as each other at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think we need to gather them all up, send them to an island somewhere, and they can all work it out.
Or not.
Or not. And if not, then we're all better off.
Yeah. Better off without them. Let's put it that
better
way.
off without them.
And I agree totally with that. And, we can go into great depths on political discussion on that front. But the culture of individualism is rife with the Scots-Irish, that's for sure.
That's an excellent point, because, and that's really what I make in the book.
Yeah.
The same point is that, in fact, by the way, when we were talking earlier about Andrew Jackson, Andrew Jackson became the symbol of American individualism. He really did, because that became, the American culture did grow into that.
I mean, he's very revered for being a very individualistic character,
And
rightly or wrongly.
Understand that what you said earlier is really, really important, and that is he was anti-elites. He was very much anti-elites. I mean, he thought they were all out to get him when he was president of the United States. I mean, so much so, he came to the defense of a young woman by the name of Peggy Eaton. Do you know the Peggy Eaton story?
I think you need to explain it, because I only know it's surface deep.
Okay. Peggy Eaton was a young lady who happened to marry Jackson's Secretary of War, John Eaton. But Peggy, you see, before she married John, ran a tavern in Washington. And John Eaton and Andrew Jackson at that time were both congressmen, and they would frequent that tavern. And what happens is that her husband, who happened to be a Navy purser, obviously was frequently away. He died at sea. Supposedly, he committed suicide because he believed that his wife was having an affair with John Eaton. Now, not long after his death, guess what? And Jackson said, don't do this. She and John get married. And what happens after that is that when Jackson assumes the presidency, all the ladies, I mean, for example, the wife of John C. Calhoun, the vice president, all these ladies ostracized Peggy. We are not going to associate with that whore, which incensed Jackson. He was madder than hell about this. Here are these elites who are attacking this young woman. Now, what he was doing, really, in many ways, is what he remembered Rachel. Rachel had been attacked as being a wanton woman, and he believed that's what killed her, because she died, in the campaign of 1828, after supposedly reading all these attacks on her as being an adulteress. So he takes this to heart, and he spends the better part of his first years of his presidency trying to defend Peggy Eaton. Ends up dismissing all the members of his cabinet because their wives would not associate with Peggy Eaton, because he was defending her honor.
Yep, that's an honor code.
Yeah,
I get it.
Yeah.
But and this is where we are now, are we not? With I'm not going to call it the shadow government. It is the deep state. The analogies are too close to be disputed.
Well, I think that this is where we're probably going to differ, because this deep state thing is assuming that you have all these competent people, residing in all these public offices who are all coming together, to run the country or force upon us some type of whatever, some type of policy that they think that they are, that they are insisting on promoting. I don't think there is such a thing as a deep state. I don't think that was assumed, like I said before, that these people really are all that. It's sort of like with, well, let's not get into that. I was going to talk about the assassination of John F. Kennedy and all the conspiracy theories about that you could have all these people get together and somehow orchestrate the assassination of a president, and no one talks.
Yeah.
Richard Nixon, for example, think about Richard Nixon. I mean, Richard Nixon, his folks tried to bug the Watergate Hotel, and they didn't get it right the first time. They go back in, they get it caught, and then they say, okay, we're going to try to pay him off. Everyone started talking. Everyone started talking. It's not like they couldn't even pull that off. So for me to think that there is this thing called the deep state, I do have some questions about that. But, the thing is, people like conspiracies. You know why? Because it simplifies the world. This is happening because you've got this group of people they're part of this cabal. They are the ones who are pulling the strings. Just to go back what you and I talked about earlier, history's messy. All this is messy, and I think that it's comforting to a lot of people to believe there's a conspiracy out there because it makes the world a simpler place.
Well, I think to a certain point, it's in my opinion, that there's an indisputable fact that with the way DC operates, with the lobbyists and corporate US, whether that you view that as the military industrial complex or not, but it's certainly integral to.
Oh, I don't disagree. I think you're right about that.
So there's an element there that you can't help but point the finger and say the lobbyists have way more control than the one man, one vote. And to decentralize DC would be a great thing, in my opinion, because I don't want my senator or representative in that cesspool when they should be representing my state.
But I think that when you talk about the deep state, that's not what people are thinking of. They're not thinking of lobbyists. They're not thinking of the corporations. They're thinking that they're bureaucrats.
As individuals, I think there are certain individuals within the World Economic Forum and the WHO, the Bank of International Settlement, and so forth, that definitely have another agenda that the US isn't necessarily being compliant with, which is a good thing.
Sure.
And we need to keep it that way, and United Nations. So all of these do good institutions may not be working with our best interests as a constitutional republic should be dealt with. So therein lies, I think, part of the conspiracy theory in regards to our constitutional republic being affected by entities that we have no control over that have massive impacts globally. And we can go down a number of rabbit holes that we've already alluded to on many a show. So yeah, I mean it's a very tough subject, and you need to be very open-minded, which would help.
Well, it's like I'm going to reference David Brooks. He says people are talking about how they don't trust the FBI, they don't trust the CIA, they don't trust. And David, whom I respect as a conservative, like George Will, I tend to consider myself a George Will conservative, but he said, "Look, I know people in the FBI. They are not raging liberals at all. They are not. They are tough-minded people who believe, for the most part, in the rule of law and being true to their responsibilities to enforce the law. But there are people now come through, they're all raging liberals, part of the woke community. That is it's absurd. It's just not true.
I think that's absurd too, but I think there's an upper echelon within the realms of, that DC area where there has been contemptible actions by some agencies. And I mean, to me,
well, we can say without a shadow of a doubt that we know that this show is being listened to from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue at certain times, and we know there are good people and good places up there in DC. The problem is that these people they're like middle management. Because once you get up to the upper tier echelon of management, that's all bureaucratic nonsense. That's appointed stuff from the president. So whoever is going to be in office is going to be the one that's going to have the person.
Right.
But we have found ourselves here lately where even the people who've been appointed by the president don't hold those loyalties to the certain president that appointed them, and now we've found ourselves in this kind of political tailspin. And I'm glad y'all kind of got off on this, and I'm glad earlier you had alluded to the fact you were talking about maybe Amazon changing it back, because it's not necessarily about tied to Moonshine, your book. It's about the murder and the justice in the Moonshine Capital, which is Franklin County.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because there was method to my madness when I said mountain justice, because I was thinking about mountain justice in so many forms, the vigilantism, example.
Well, when the law fails you, what are you left with?
I'm sorry?
When the law fails you, what are you left with?
Your own devices, and you come to exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful illustration of what I meant by mountain justice. And of course, mountain justice in terms of defending your livelihood, right? Defending your family, defending your own personal honor,
defending your beliefs.
Defending your beliefs.
And that's a really tricky one because we all hold different beliefs.
That's kind of what I was getting at with you. Now, when you're writing this book and you're reading up on all these cases and you're reading up on all these incidences where, it is cold blood murder. Now whether it was justified or not, was left up to the courts. But, here you are writing this book and you're seeing how justice used to be dealt out here. Mm-hmm. I was just kind of, what's running through your mind when you're thinking about our current state of affairs, and then you're reading about how things used to be punished, 100 years ago, how things were dealt with and stuff. And I was just kind of, how do you when it's going through your mind, how does that work for you? You know what I mean? If you don't understand my question, it's just, do you get any kind of, what's going through your mind essentially? Like, because and I'll try and help you out. When I'm reading it, it's going through my mind is, what? A lot of this stuff is very circumstantial. And a lot of these cases, it's a lot of my word versus your word, and even juries and lawyers using your word, because back then your word was a lot more honorable. Nowadays, anybody will lie and say anything they can on the stand to get out of something.
They lied then too. Don't.
No, they lied then too. But I guess what I'm getting at is I'm sitting there reading, I'm thinking, maybe not quite to this extent, because back then they took it really far.
Could you give me a specific example?
Well, I'm just saying, just any of them, the honor killings. If you messed around with my wife, then I've got justification to go shoot. And I'm not saying we should take it that far today, but maybe we're missing a little bit of that. If you cross the line, you're going to get the shit kicked out. We're missing a little bit of that today, which I think is
interesting you bring that up because you're aware of the controversy surrounding Jason Aldean's song, right?
Yes. Who is from Macon.
Yeah, he was not from a small town, by the way.
Not at all. And actually, his small town, Macon, is one of the most, I looked up statistics, it's one of the worst crime-ridden cities in the country.
It is, and it's a very large city. I grew up in Franklin County, a very small area, and Rocky Mount, when I was growing up, had 4,000 people.
We're not far from that.
That's a small town.
Yep.
Macon is not a small town.
No.
And as far as I know, Jason Aldean did not work on a farm like a lot of us did. But
nor did he write that song either.
But I'm not passing judgment on the song. I'm just saying that, there are a lot of folks, and I guess this is connected. It does make a connection to the book, doesn't it? That a lot of people think, well, if you step over the line, then you're going to have to face rough justice and met out by the community. And it's kind of a very, but it's a very simplistic way of thinking. That we're going to just, we're going to take care of things, and not that I like the idea that people in a community fear that the neighbors are going to come after you if you really you really step across the line in whatever fashion that. But you got to remember too that in the book I detail how there might be a black man who happened to shack up, if you will, with a white woman, and he was visited. This has happened in the county. He was visited. His name was Richard Woods, as I recall, and members of the community showed up at his door at the young woman's store. Okay, he hid under the floorboards of the house. They came there looking for him, and they took him out, and they beat him and shot and killed him. And then they beat her and told her to get out of town.
That's despicable.
But that's not the only case.
Mm-hmm.
There was an old man in his 90s who was thought to be a sorcerer. A sorcerer. Now, in black culture, you have the long tradition of conjuring on plantation. This goes back to West Africa.
Well, it's deep in the Haitian community,
Very
being
much.
voodoo.
Conjure-
So I'm very, very familiar with that.
Voodoo, that kind of thing. It's conjuring, and you had conjurers on plantations, and that they would, fashion some amulet or whatever it may be, and they would try to call upon the spirits to influence events or what have you. And it was believed by some that a woman in the community was sick and dying because he had placed some kind of a spell on her. And this was a beloved person. Just an old man, lived in a little cabin on land that was owned by a white man that he was friends with. But they show up at his door late at night and they shoot him through the head. This old man. And there was outrage.
I'm not surprised.
And he was completely innocent. Completely, there was nothing that he would never harm anyone. But they were convinced that he was a sorcerer. And that's another example of this vigilantism, this superstition, this fear.
That's fear. This is driven by fear. Now, when you live in a state of fear, your perspective, I think, has been unbalanced, and that troubles me now with the fear that we're living under. But when you come back to vigilantism, and I'm not condoning any of that despicable action, right? Because it's despicable, and I'll leave it at that. But when the law fails you, because the law now is on a two-tier system, the law works for the haves, but it does not work for the have-nots. Mm-hmm. Now, when you have an imbalance in law, people are going to take
matters into their own hands.
Matter into their own hands. And that's a reflection on a failure of society and the legal system that we live under. So, and by no means am I condoning any of that nonsense and despicable acts that we're talking about, but this is how it happens. So when you've got a two-tier legal system, which I think we have, vigilantism becomes an easy way of resolving an issue, rightly or wrongly.
Well, what you just described could, again, I try to avoid political discussions, but there was vigilantism on January 6th. That was vigilantism. I don't know how the other way you could describe it. You've got people erecting a scaffold, wanting to hang the Vice President of the United States. They're wanting to overthrow they're taking the law in their own hand because of what they believe.
Right.
Because of what they believe. Not because of anything factual. They had been fed a lot of lies.
Yeah.
And they were willing to go out there and act on those lies. And that's scary. But
is that not a reflection on the state of society and being a country of laws? This is the consequence. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not promoting that January the 6th. I don't view it necessarily as an insurrection. There's just too much behind there to say that they were insurrectionists. I think that's.
I don't think it was that well organized.
No,
that would suggest that there was this big plot. Everyone got together and said, "Okay, we're going to overthrow the government." No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it was like this kind of disorganized vigilantism.
It was mob mentality, and it was no different. Essentially, now the thing about January 6th, and I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent about this, but there were two separate stories to that day. There was a front entrance and then there was a rear entrance. One entrance, there was a lot of violence going on. People were fighting. Right. They were carrying on. On the other entrance, people were being ushered through by cops saying, "Come on in."
Yeah, it's very messy.
It is. It really is. And the same thing goes for, the Summer of Love in 2020. A lot of people out there are destroying their buildings.
Oh, yeah.
And off of lies. So we're all in the same shit blender together.
I'm glad
we're all in the same shit blender.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because what they were doing, that's another kind of vigilante. Very disorganized, chaotic, but they are all saying, well, we're going to take the law in our own hands. We're justified in doing this. And so we're going to destroy buildings. We're going to attack people. We're just, because this is how we're going to get our own justice.
And honestly, to goodness, and I don't, even for January 6th, as well as those guys, I honestly don't believe that these were bad people. I think there were feds in the mix of things, and they were encouraging people. Yes, by the way, and I've alluded to this on the show before. I said I think there was agent provocateurs in the BLM riots, just the same way as I think there were agent provocateurs in the January 6th riot. I think there is a conceited effort out there to sow discourse among the population. I think they're doing a phenomenal job.
But why? Why?
Control, divide and conquer. It's the oldest technique in the book.
But who is control? Who?
Well, the deep state that we just talked about a few minutes ago that you said.
All right.
Well, no, I mean, I just think it's corporations. It's people with, the same people who probably profited from the entire country getting shut down during the COVID period. It certainly wasn't Main Street. It was Wall Street.
Okay.
It's there's so much to it. We've dove into this in the show many times before, and I think we will here again. I don't want to get off course too awful much here, but I just, for whatever reason, I think at the end of the day, one of the big reasons why we started this show is to get away from worrying about what the hell's going on in D.C. and even to a smaller extent, Richmond, because at the end of the day, we can't change any of it. What we can do here in Franklin County is
ask questions.
We can ask questions. We can bring people on this show that might not otherwise have an outlet or a voice. We can tell stories of great people making great things and having great accomplishments that come from here. And we're talking, athletes, bootleggers, authors, musicians.
Business owners.
Yeah, exactly. Business owners, the list goes on.
Farmers.
Yes, and telling their stories.
Farmers, yes.
And how important it is. And at the same time, encouraging people, hey, go shop here. They're local. Go shop there.
I really love that about what you're doing here, because, shop local. Support these folks. They have invested in the community, so let's invest in them.
Exactly.
Perfect.
We're trying to put people together. We're trying to send people, go buy your meat from this person. Go buy your produce from this person. So, there's so much great, and you're just another shining example of, the great people we've had that have come from this town and went off and done very interesting things. Like I'm sitting here while we're doing this show, I'm thinking in my head about 20 different other shows we could do just with you. I was talking to him here a minute ago about getting on here with Henry and having a discussion about all the history. We could have him just sit there and talk with you about travels in Europe. You know what I mean? And that can, the interesting people that we have here just tell so many freaking stories.
But I also don't want to harp back, as much as history is part of our cultural heritage. We've got to be very careful about, and I need to tread a little bit carefully about how this comes out. So don't misconstrue me. But if we harp back and say that Franklin County was, only about moonshine, we're doing a great disservice to the other folks that weren't party to that, about building this county up from an agricultural perspective, from a tourism perspective, from a great place to live. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to be too blinkered with the moonshine story. It is a great story. It is part of our cultural history, but it's a waning part of influence. Now we need to be moving forward and recognizing the people that are making such positive strides to make our community better. And whether the moonshine history has a part in that, I'm sure it does. But
it has to,
and it has to. But is it a leading element in that story? Historically, yes, I think. But now we're seeing, well, no, it isn't. Now we're looking at a community from another angle, and we've grown beyond that. So, I'm I'm not knocking the moonshine history element to the county in any way, shape, or form, because it's about individualism, and the individualism that I think that we can demonstrate with all the folks that we have here in this great county is a great thing. So
it's the rebel spirit.
Exactly.
It's the rebel spirit that those moonshiners had, that those
the Irish have, the Scots-Irish. It all comes back into that cultural evolution,
right? And the rugged individualism. Of course, when I wrote this book, I felt like I could be open to a lot of criticism, in that I was, spending too much time on the violence, and I even had some folks at a very reputable institution who said they did not want to be a part of it because they believed it promoted violence, as if you read this book and suddenly want to go out and kill somebody, that it was just. But the thing is,
that's absurd.
Well, I thought so too.
Well, it's like the great Ron Paul said.
And I was really hurt. I was really hurt given the role that my family has played in promoting and participating in this institution and its festivities. I won't name the institution, but I was hurt by that, and wouldn't have anything to do with it.
But isn't that a denial of truth? Because when you look to rewrite history, this is where we go back on that same thing, pulling down Confederate statues or trying to rewrite history, the cancel culture. I'm so against that, because you can't cancel history.
No, but yeah, that's why I was telling Billy earlier that, and maybe I mentioned this to you, Sam, as well, that that's why I documented everything I wrote, because I didn't want to be accused of just promoting violence without any factual evidence.
It happened.
It happened, and it's part of the culture. My objective here was not to try to tell the whole story of Franklin County. It was to tell just one part of its history, and that
impacted you personally. Mm-hmm. So I get it.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
I didn't. I think that there are some people who didn't want families mentioned, didn't want their stories told without, the thing is, everything I wrote is documented in the papers and other sources. But yeah, but this was something that I've discovered was only endemic to that particular institution.
Right.
It was not the thinking of other people in the county. In fact, they were eager to read about this, things that Billy mentioned he did not know. But there are some folks out there who see themselves as the self-appointed guardians of Appalachian culture. And
no such thing.
There is no such thing.
No such thing.
Yeah, that we are going to guard it. We're going to protect it. We're going to only promote one side of it.
We're going to spin it.
Yeah, we're going to spin it to make it look like we're all these quilt making, dulcimer playing, fiddle playing, flat footing, farmers, and of course my family was all part of that, but they also were part of the other,
Yeah.
Well, you can't, like you said, you can't whitewash history, and at the same time, those people.
But don't sanitize it. Sanitizing it is actually very offensive.
Well, the people who gatekeep, as you mentioned, Appalachian culture. They are completely antithetical to what we do here. And I think that's why that makes us even. God, I don't want to sound like tooting my own horn, but I think that what we do makes it that much more important, because you have to get both sides of the stories out there. And and you mentioned some of the families and stuff, and I think that's one of my favorite parts about the book is I'm picking it up and I'm recognizing family after family after family, name after name. Like I'm saying, I know people with these last names. Like I know, even the Jaybird Philpott, my brother dated his granddaughter. I heard this story about what he did. I'm not going to ruin it for everybody. I want you to go read the entire story because I had my version that didn't quite make up. The end result was always there. I heard the same end result of how it started, how it ended, but the facts were always off, and I always assumed they were accurate simply because I had somebody that was a direct descendant. And over the years, like the whole telephone thing, you say something, somebody says something, and you kind of miss it out here and there. But even still, like all the other names in there, we recognize even people that have been on this show, like Henry Law, people we've mentioned on the show, Willie Carter Sharp. I think that's the most fascinating thing is all the names that I recognize just going through there. But at the same time, it's like I don't think anybody, and I'm talking 99% of the people out there, if they read that, their interest is going to be piqued more than they're going to be offended. Like 99% of the time, it's like, because it was so long ago. No, I mean, it only takes 2 generations to screw up an empire, and we're like 3 or 4 generations from some of these stories. So it really doesn't make sense to be offended by it because it's telling part of our history, and nobody around here is connecting you to these people anymore. You know what I mean?
And again, it's one part of history. I don't ever want to think to say
it's a minuscule part of history as well. But I mean, let's never forget the victors write history. They write the history now, rightly or wrongly.
Rightly or wrongly.
So you've got to have that pinch of salt. Now, when books like this come out, that have been backed up with factual evidence, if your nose has been put out of shape by it, I'm sorry, I can't help your feelings. Mm-hmm. Tough.
Well, this is the risk you run, Simon, anytime you write a book.
Oh, of course.
You're always going to be open to some kind of criticism that I was offended by this. I think you're stereotyping these people. I'm not sure whether it actually happened. I'm questioning your sources, which you should do. You should always question sources.
Absolutely. Go ahead and do the research yourself.
The research, yeah. That's what I taught my students.
And it will support, hopefully,
a
factual account of what happened.
Yeah.
So if you're offended, I'm sorry, I can't help your feelings.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
And that's the brutal truth of it. And,
Well, that's again, right. That's what happens when you write books. And I'm working on a second book right now. The History Press has an option on it. It's about Macon, Georgia during the early 1900s when the city council actually created a red light district. They did it. They wanted to move all the girls into brothels in one area and protect them. And, of course, what happens is that the ministers and other people rise up and are upset about it. And the city council, no, we're keeping it alive. Now, why they did that probably had a lot to do with the fact that some of the more prominent citizens in the city owned those brothals. And they may have frequented those brothels.
You guaranteed they did.
Yeah. But this story actually involves too the appointment of the first policewoman in Macon in 1928, who basically oversaw that district. And so it's an interesting story. Right now, the working title is "The Devil Down in Dixie."
Oh. That's a great title.
That's a phenomenal title.
That's a real catcher.
Yeah.
I mean, and all you've got to do is look at Amsterdam.
I love Amsterdam.
So do I.
You go to the red light. Families go to the red light.
All right, come on, Simon. Let's hear some red light stories.
No,
for your grandkids.
No, we don't want to go down that road.
I'm just kidding, Heather. I have faith 100% that Simon was only a walking past tourist.
I can honestly say, hand on heart, I have never been to the red light district in Amsterdam.
But
I have flown into and out of Amsterdam.
What about
I've lost count of how many times I've been there. And it's a great city.
But, when I was there and I went down to the red light district at that time with my English girlfriend, But anyway,
That's another podcast. Mark that down.
Here comes
Well,
another
anyway,
2
book.
hours and 24 minutes.
probably know
in.
where I'm going here. But anyway, the girls are in the windows.
Oh yeah.
They stand out there, and and families go down there. You'll see a couple with their children, and
But there's nothing obscene,
no,
from what I've heard, that goes on in those shopfront windows. There is there is nothing vulgar.
no, nothing.
What we now see with the LGBT, whatever, trans community, whatever, doing, some of their displays in public, quite frankly, are disgusting. Now, you wouldn't see that there because that's not how you behave.
No.
Now, arguably, you can go into a coffee shop and have some of the finest weed on the planet. Or you can go down and wander through and do not take pictures. Is from what I've heard is the big rule. You don't take pictures.
No, you don't take pictures.
But there
It's
is
a no-no.
there is nothing vulgar and distasteful to a certain degree with what goes on in that shop. You are window shopping. It's
Obviously,
the
they
classic
dress
example.
suggestively, but nothing like you would say you see in some of these.
Some of these pride marches that is absolutely vulgar.
Well, this does bring up an interesting topic we should have for another show at some point in time. I would love to. I would love to have a conversation, have a show where we discuss whether it kind of alluding to the book that you were thinking about writing, whether maybe as far as societal reasons, is it in our best interest to isolate whatever some may consider degeneracy? And I know the show The Wire that came on HBO a few years ago was massively popular. The show based around on this, where the new police chief came in and said, you know what? I know the heroin dealing's going to be going on. I know the buying and supplying and stuff. Why don't we sit there and say, okay, if you're in this part of the city, in this neighborhood where it's always prominent anyway, then cops will sit there and do your thing. But don't bring it out to any other part of the city. So I think that would be a great topic for another show, whether we allow maybe a section of a town or a county, say, okay, if you want, because at the end of the day, you can't stop it. You can't stop it. But if your goal is ultimately to change it, I don't think the evangelical, you're going to burn in hell if you don't listen to me style is going to work on some of these people. So maybe just letting them do it and then coming to their own realization that it might be wrong might change them. You know what I mean? But either way.
When we were talking earlier about the stupidest amendment to the Constitution ever.
Which one were y'all talking about? Letting the 19th Amendment? Giving women the right to vote?
No.
Oh,
Oh, wow. Okay.
See how we snuck that in there?
Oh, wow.
That was
okay.
a dirty trick.
Boy, you're going to get a lot of response on that one.
that's fine. I'm waiting for it.
You're waiting for it?
Absolutely.
Well, when we're talking about the
Prohibition.
18th Amendment, prohibition, and how we thought we could legislate morality, and
You can't legislate morality.
no, you can't.
In fact, I don't want a bureaucrat making a decision on a moral matter. That's not in their scope of business.
Right.
So when you make a moral decision from a town council perspective, a board of supervisors perspective, quite frankly, you're insulting, number one, my intelligence, but number one, you're overstepping your authority in that regard.
Well, there's a saying I know in England, they talk about the granny state.
Yes.
The granny state, that they're always trying to look after you and make sure
We are the government. We're here to help.
we're here to help.
Those should be some of the most alarming statements that you ever... When you hear that personally, you need to be running out the back door, grabbing whatever firearm you have and as much cash and running like hell. Because nothing is good is going to come from that statement. We're the government and we're here to help. And I believe that's exactly what Spike Cohen swung around and said, well, that makes you a libertarian.
Well, exactly. The government is famous for breaking your leg and then handing you a crutch and saying, here, if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't be able to walk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we get to that kind of stuff. And I know we're winding up on time here. We've been going on almost 2.5 hours. This is one of the longer shows we've done in quite a while, Simon. I really, honest to goodness, wish circumstances were different. We just sit here and keep on talking and drinking liquor and letting the stories go. Because
drinking liquor, is that what we've been doing?
Is that legal?
I don't know. Is that legal?
Well, we're just speaking in hypotheticals.
Is that legal during a podcast? Can you do that?
Well, we're not bound by the FCC regulations here. We can pretty much do whatever the hell we want to do. So,
and we do.
And even if there was FCC regulations, I very seriously doubt we would. Yes, there's no way in the world we would follow them. I mean, there's no chance in the world.
It's not how we roll.
This isn't a shtick. I mean, we're not saying this to toot our own horns or anything. I legitimately go out of my way to, disavow any government order there is out there. Anything the government says, I try and do the direct opposite. That's how I navigated pretty much my entire life since I got back from Iraq. So
there are God's Big Ten, and the rest are bullshit.
Exactly. So, I mean, this has been phenomenal. Before we get off here, I want to say a few quick things. Phillip, for the love of God, thank you so much. Thank your sister for reaching out to me.
Thank you.
This is. It also goes to show what a great thing we've got going on here at this show. Not only do we reach a regional and sometimes national fan base or listening base or whatever, but we still manage to be able to have this community thing going where people look out for each other. We send messages to people send messages to us, the things we know, the things we hear about. So we try and mix it up and do things where everybody can get a little bit out of it. So for the people who are not necessarily from here that listen to the show, sometimes we'll kind of dive into local politics and stuff, and that might be boring for most people. We try and make it a little interesting, so these people are kind of tuning in to watch the car wreck in slow motion with us. So it kind of piques their interest. But I think a show like this, it's going to pique the interest of every single person we've got out there. For one, it's going to pique the interest of all of our local audience, right?
Oh, for sure.
All the Franklin County people, Floyd County, all the surrounding areas. Basically the mainstay of our listening base. And for good reason. Like I said, when you read this book, I guarantee you, if you're in Franklin County, one of the surrounding counties, you're going to read a story in this book about a last name somebody and you're going to be like, wow, I wonder if they're related to them. I wonder if they, you know what I mean? It's really going to do that for you. But for the people who are not necessarily from around here, it's a great crime story and a great Appalachian story for everybody out in further Appalachia about the spirit we have in Appalachia that goes further than just the mountain justice we used to have here. It goes all the way up to Blair Mountain, with the coal miners fighting the federal government, taking up arms against them. It goes to Athens, Tennessee, where the entire town decided that this corrupt sheriff and these corrupt bureaucrats in town, we've had enough of it. And they were all a bunch of World War II veterans, and they overthrew them. It's about that spirit. So whether you're a local person and you can sit here and read the book and listen to this show and be able to enjoy in some of the names that are mentioned, but for the people who aren't connected to this area, not necessarily, you're going to enjoy this book because it's going to have a lot of great true crime stories, and it's going to blow your freaking mind about how tough and resilient we are here in Appalachia, which is,
And by
Well
the way,
said. I appreciate that.
when you do get to read the book, and I haven't read it, but Murder and Mountain Justice in the Moonshine Capital of the World, I can see that being a movie.
Yes. If nothing else, a mini-series. I think a mini-series might do it more justice because a movie, as we discussed earlier in this show, really misses the mark because it's going to break your heart when you find out the truth. Like in the movie you watch it, it's like, oh man, Tom Hardy and Forrest Bondurant. I mean, he just ain't taking no shit from nobody, and the corrupt DA comes up and he tosses his money back into the car. But in real life, he testified that he did actually pay the granny fee.
Are you suggesting by any remote chance here, Billy, that this could be a Netflix mini-series?
It could be something. Amazon, Netflix, one of those kind of things. Because you could almost break down each chapter and each story into its own specific like mini episode where they all tie together, but it's, you know what I mean? But it's not exactly
Billy. I better get. Sorry, Philip. I better get my signed copy.
I think that's very reasonable. We have friends in high places, and we have friends in high places listening to the show, so you never know. And also, I'm sure you have some people that probably already had some discussions with you about some of this stuff, which means you should jump in here and get this book right now before it gets too expensive for you to buy.
Now,
if you don't mind, I'm sorry, Simon. If you don't mind, would you mind telling people about the signings?
Oh, I was getting ready to do that. That's the.
I just wanted to add one little clip here. We also know many people in low places.
More people in low places than high places, just to clarify that. The ratio is probably 95 to 5 when it comes to that. We know a few people in high places, and most of them probably tell us to piss right on off. But yeah, so for all this book and all of its glory and all the great stories that you're going to read from it, for one, if you can't get it at a book signing, where can you find it at? Amazon? Is there any local bookstores around here?
I would love for people to buy the book from indie bookstores. I really like to support them. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can get it at Goodreads. All this is online.
Franklin County Historical Society up here?
They will have copies. The book No Further in Roanoke, Virginia. You'll find it in Stanton. You'll find it in Blacksburg, at Blacksburg Books. And Stanton is actually if I got to remember the bookstore now. Oh, well, I guess I'll have to
Google bookstores in Stanton and call everyone up to you and find
you'll find it. Yeah, I did a book signing up there not long ago. Actually, the name of that bookstore is the Book Dragon. It's in Stanton. I did a signing up there, and I'll be doing one down in Danville. That is called the Dog-Eared Page. But I'll be down in Galax during the middle of the convention at Chapters Bookstore. And then, importantly, for those of you in Franklin County and you don't want to go to these bookstores, you can see me and maybe a lot of your friends and friends-to-be at the Rocky Mount Train Depot on Sunday, August 13th. I'll be doing a signing there, but not only that, I'll have books available.
Fantastic. And if we setting up this other show at the Burger Company, subject to, I think you doing a book signing there will be a great thing as well.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate it.
Well, I'll go ahead. I'm going to give you the next few signings for anybody listening to this around here. Like you said, August 10th at Chapters in Galax, Virginia. That's 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. August 11th, Blacksburg Books in Blacksburg, Virginia, 7 to 9 p.m. August 12th, the Dog-Eared Page in Danville from 11 to 1. August 13th, Rocky Mount Train Depot, 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And September 21st, Pages, Mount Airy, North Carolina, 11 to 1. And September 23rd, Moonshine Memories Festival in Snow Creek, 10 to 1. If you're going to be like me that day, most likely I'm going to go to that festival. I've always wanted to go there and might take the kids and then maybe send the wife back home and go down to Martinsville for the late model race. That's the day of that. So that'd be a great thing to do. You go down to Snow Creek, you go to the Moonshine Festival, make your way down to Martinsville to catch the late model race. It's, within, earshot distance of each other. So we're going to try and do this go round. So all those places, and like Simon had just alluded to a minute ago, something we talked about off air, we're going to try and set down Phillip with a local prominent moonshiner or two here, maybe in September when he comes back in for the Mount Airy and the Moonshine Festival gig in Snow Creek, to maybe a Thursday night at the Rocky Mount Burger Company or a smokehouse somewhere. Great. One of these places we might sit down, have a place for you to eat, and listen to some really, really cool moonshine stories. We'll go back and forth, hopefully that's a thing. So,
you speak to my people, you speak to your people, and we'll make it happen.
We'll speak to everybody's people.
We'll make it happen.
Phillip, anything else? Can anybody find you on social media or anything?
Yes, I've always resisted social media, but my publicist said that I need to have a presence on social.
Embrace it.
You should.
Yeah, and I'm
about to get Simon on Twitter.
I had to embrace it, and it's been actually wonderful because I've been able to reconnect with some of my childhood friends and reach a lot of people. So I'm on Facebook. See, it's Phillip A. Gibbs on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter or those other things.
You've made your first step into social media with Facebook. The cursed Facebook. Well done, Phillip. That's a giant step for mankind.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank both of you. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation we had. I couldn't imagine it going better.
Thank you for being here. It's been great. We've had a blast.
It has been fun. I'm telling you what. And we've had some great liquor.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, I'm not supposed to say that. Sorry. Ignore what I just said.
This is mid-level liquor. We'll get to the great liquor the next go round. We have a show.
Yeah, we'll get to the good stuff.
Yeah, we'll
later.
get to the good stuff. Today was just a pretty good. And you know what? I also, for all of our listeners out there, also we're on Facebook at the Appalachian Podcast. Facebook does a phenomenal job of shadow banning and throttling our account. Honest to goodness, we've got almost at 10,000 followers on Facebook, just a couple more hundred. So if you listen to this, go out there. You can invite, I think, up to 49 or 50 friends at a time. Do 49 to be safe. If you want to go out there and invite a bunch of people, if you listen to this from your friend list, let's get us over 10,000. Let's get us on all the Alphabet Boys watch lists, because they're always watching all of them over 10,000, I think. So I really want to get on the FBI and CIA watch list that we're not already on. So we need to get to 10,000.
It's like a dream come true.
But at the same time, Facebook really does throttle us. It makes no sense at all. We've got about 10,000 on Facebook. I've got close to 2,000 on Twitter, and our engagement is so much better on Twitter. Simon's getting ready to get a Twitter. We're going to start doing Twitter Spaces over there. We're going to fool around with that a little bit. So go check us out there at Get On Tap. Instagram has started throttling us because they have suggested that our Second Amendment memes are a little too offensive, and they have asked, they have basically ascertained that if I remove some of these memes that aren't in bad taste at all, they're just, they're in support of the Second. If I just remove these, then we'll think about, allowing your page to be shown to other people that don't already follow you. So I basically told Instagram where they could shove their feed. So I'm not going to sit there and give them my time or effort. I'll do a nice little meme every now and then, just because I have quite a few followers over there. But Twitter's the place you need to be right now for maximum free speech and for the opportunity to start catching some of our Twitter Spaces. So that's at Get On Tap. Have a huge Twitter follow. I mean, it's starting to roll in over there. It's getting a lot of engagement. People starting to come in on the show. So thank everybody for that. Follow us on all of those. And most importantly, patreon.com/getontap. You go there. We're going to start putting those Twitter Spaces on as part of our subscriber-only content. $3 a month is the minimum. You can always give more, and we appreciate it. But $3, you'll get all of our shows like this one early. It might be a day. It might be a week. We're poor here. We're trying to do what we can do. So that's where you can support us, and we put all of our money right back into the community. Either I take it and buy more equipment, or I take it to spend gas to go to places and promote other people, or I'm going and I'm taking that money and I'm buying things from other local people. I'm buying meat from Foggy Ridge. I'm buying stuff down at Melvin's Farm to Fork. I'm going to Rocky Mount Burger Company, Smokehouse, Rocky Mount Smoke. I'm putting it back into the community. So thank you for everybody that does support us there. For anybody else, WB Riddle, PayPal, at Get On Tap for Cash App, and at Get On Tap for Venmo. Both of you want to do a one-time donation. Look, everything you do, we certainly appreciate that. I've got nothing else to say. I'm out of breath and winded.
No, thank you, Billy. Thank you, Simon.
That's our pleasure. But
No.
Facebook throttling us. You made that statement.
Yes.
Trust me, the feeling is mutual.
Well, yeah. Well, either way, Twitter's the place to be for discussion right now if you want to find us over there. So for Phillip, Simon, once again, one more time, the book is Murder and Mountain Justice in the Moonshine Capital of the World. You're going to love it. We love it. Pay attention to this episode. Subscribers are going to get a chance. I'm going to do a drawing for our Patreon subscribers to get one of these signed copies. And for the rest of the people out there listening, after a week, I'm going to have a little contest. I'll ask 5 questions. Whoever answers the 5 questions from listening to the show first will get another signed copy. And keep your ears out, because we're looking at a live show maybe somewhere in Rocky Mount, mid to late September.
Right on.
Gentlemen.
We didn't signal while changing lanes. They pulled him over, found her cocaine. She said, I love you. Yes, I love you forevermore. If you tell that policeman that cocaine load is yours, he spent time locked up. She ran around everyone knew it. Small country town. While he lay rotting, Lord, she was blowing on his door. And the day they released him, well, he had nowhere to go. Lord, and his ashes to ashes, and you know it's dust to dust. Just another low down woman that a man can't trust. They released him. No one was there. Had she forgotten? Did she still care? He called up her mama, Lord, and these words he heard her cry. Lord, that no good daughter of mine, spend all your money on cocaine, overdosed and died. Lord, it's ashes to ashes, and you know it's dust to dust. Just another low down woman that a man can't trust. In the spring, one sunny day, my good gal left me, and she went away. Now she's gone, I don't worry, because I'm sitting on top of the world.